Hamlet, dost thou know this waterfly? Horatio, no, my good lord. Hamlet, thy state is the more gracious, for 'tis a vice to know him. Shakespeare, here on my knees by heavens blessed, Noah I swear, if you persist, I ne'er henceforth will see you, but rather wander through the world a beggar and live on solid scraps at poor men's doors. For though to fortune lost, I still inherit my mother's virtues and my father's honour. Otway. The day following that on which Paul had been made acquainted with the secret of his birth, the inhabitants of the castle of Auray awoke more than ever, absorbed in the fears and hopes which their several interests had created. For that day must necessarily prove a decisive one to the whole of them. The Marchioness, whom our readers have ere this discovered, was neither perverse or wicked, but a haughty and inflexible woman, saw in it the termination of those heart-rending apprehensions which for so many years had been her daily companion. For it was above all in the eyes of her children that she wished to preserve that unsullied reputation, the usurpation of which had been purchased at such cost to her. Lecter was not only a fitting son-in-law, being the bearer of a name as noble as her own, but more than this, a man, or rather a good genius, who at the same moment would bear away not only her daughter, whom he would take with him as his wife, but her son also, to whom the minister, thanks to his alliance, had promised to give a regiment. Both her children gone, her firstborn might come, and the secret revealed to him would find no echo. Moreover, there were 1,000 methods by which to close his lips. The fortune of the Marchioness was immense, and the gold was one of those resources which, in such a case, she deemed infallible. The more terrible her fears, the more ardently did she desire this union, so that she not only encouraged the anxiety of Lector, but she also excited that of Emmanuel. As to the latter, tired of living unknown in Paris or immured in Brittany, lost in the crowd of brilliant young men who formed the household of the king, or shut up in the antique castle of his ancestors, having their portraits as his sole companions, he knocked with impatient eagerness at the golden door which his intended brother-in-law was to open for him at Versailles. The grief and tears of his sister had certainly for a time afflicted him, for he was ambitious, more from the dread of the ennui which would consume him if compelled to live on his estate, and from the desire of parading at the head of his regiment, captivating the hearts of all the ladies by the richness and good taste of his uniform, than from either pride or hardness of heart. Being himself incapable of forming any serious attachment, and despite the fatal consequences of his sister's love, he considered that love merely as a child fancy, which the tumult and pleasure of the world would soon efface from her memory, and he really believed that before a year had elapsed, she would be the first to thank him for having thus done violence to her feelings. As to Marguerite, poor victim, so irrevocably condemned to be immortalated to the fear of the one and to the ambition of the other, the scene of the preceding day had made a profound impression upon her mind. She could not at all account to herself for the extraordinary feelings which the young man, who had transmitted to her the words of Lusigna, had awakened in her heart, who had tranquillized her as to the fate of the unhappy exile, and had concluded by pressing her to his heart and calling her his sister. A vague and instinctive hope whispered to her heart that this man, as he had told her, had received from heaven the mission to protect her. But as she was ignorant of the tie which bound him to her, or the secret which made him master of his mother's will, of the influence he might exercise over her future life, she did not dare allow herself to dream of happiness. Habituated as she had been for 6 months to consider death only as the terms of her misfortunes, the Marquis, alone, amid the various emotions which agitated all around him, had remained coldly and impassively indifferent. for to him the world had ceased to move since that dreadful day on which reason had abandoned him, constantly absorbed by the one fixed idea, that of his mortal combat without seconds. The only words he ever uttered were those pronounced by the Count de Morlaix, when he forgave him his death. He was an old man, weak as an infant, and whose wife could overawe by a gesture, and who received from her cold and continuous will every impulsion which for 20 years the vegetating instinct had received, and which on him had usurped the place of reason and free will. On this day, however, a great change had taken place in his monotonous mode of life. A valet de chamber had entered his apartment, and had exceeded the Marchioness in the care of his toilet. He had dressed him in his uniform of steward of the household, had decorated his breast with the several orders that had been conferred upon him, and then the Marchioness placed a pen in his hand, had ordered him to try to sign his name, and he had obeyed, passively and negligently, without imagining that he was studying the part of an executioner. About 3 in the afternoon, a post-chaise, the sound of whose wheels had very differently impressed the hearts of the 3 persons who were expecting it, entered the courtyard of the castle. Emmanuel had eagerly run down to the vestibule to receive his future brother-in-law, for it was he who had arrived. Lector sprang lightly from his carriage. He had halted for some time at the last post-house to attire himself in a presentable costume, so that he arrived in an elegant court dress of the latest fashion. Emmanuel smiled at this evidence of his anxiety, for it was clear to be perceived that Lector was determined not to lose the advantage of a first favourable impression by presenting himself in a dusty travelling dress. His intercourse with the fair sex had taught him that they almost invariably judge from the first glance, and the effect which it produces upon their minds or hearts, let it be favourable or unfavourable, is with difficulty removed. Moreover, it is but rendering justice to the Baron to acknowledge that his person was graceful and elegant, and might have been dangerous to any woman whose heart was not already occupied by another. "Permit me, my dear Baron," said Emmanuel, advancing towards him, in the momentary absence of the ladies, "to do the honours of the mansion of my ancestors. See," continued he, when they had reached the top of the stone steps leading into the hall, and pointing to the turrets and the bastions, "these date from the time of Philip Augustus, as to architecture, and from Henry IV in point of ornament." "Upon my honour," replied the Baron, in the effective tone which the young men of that day had adopted, "it is a most charming fortress, and throws around it to a distance of at least 3 leagues a baronial odour which would perfume even an army contractor. If ever," continued he, as they passed through the hall and entering the gallery ornamented on each side with long lines of family portraits, "I should take a fancy to enter into a rebellion against his most Christian Majesty, I shall entreat you to lend me this jewel of a place, and," added he, casting his eyes on the long rows of ancestors which offered themselves to his view, "the garrison with it." 33 quarters. "I will not say in flesh and blood," replied Emmanuel, "for they are long since turned to dust, but in painting, as you see. They begin with a certain Chevalier Hugues d'Ore who accompanied King Louis VII to the Crusades. That one, it is pretended, is my Aunt Deborah, whom you see decked out as Judith. And all this eventually ends in the male line, in the last member of this illustrious family, your very humble and very obedient servant, Emmanuel d'Ore." "It is perfectly respectable, and nothing can be more authentic." "Yes, but as I do not feel that I have, as yet, become sufficiently a patriarch," rejoined Emmanuel, passing before the Baron to show him the way to the apartment which had been prepared for him, "to spend my days in such formidable society, I hope, Baron, that you have thought of the means by which I can withdraw from it." "Undoubtedly, my dear Count," said Lector, following him. I wished even to have been myself the bearer of your commission, as my wedding present to you. I knew of a vacancy in the Queen's Dragoons, and called yesterday on the Marquis de Maurepas to solicit it for you. When I heard that it had been granted, at the request of I know not what mysterious admiral, a sort of corsair, private or fantastic being, whom the Queen had made the fashion by giving him her hand to kiss, and whom the King had taken a great affection to because he beat the English, I know not where, so that His Majesty has conferred upon him the Order of Military Merit, and presented him a sword with a gold hilt, just as he would have done to one of the nobility. In short, the game is lost on that side, but do not be alarmed, we will turn round to another. Very well, replied Emmanuel. I care not what regiment it may be in. What I desire is that it should be a rank suitable to my name, and a position which will be becoming of our wealth. Precisely, you shall have them. But how, said Emmanuel, wishing to change the subject of conversation, how did you manage to get rid of 1,000 engagements that you must have had on your hands? Why, said the Baron with that perfectly free and easy air, which belonged only to that distinguished class, and stretching himself upon a couch, for they had at length reached the apartment destined for him. Why, by frankly stating the facts to them, I announced at the Queen's card table I was going to be married. Oh, good heaven! Why, this is perfect heroism. Above all, if you acknowledge that you were about to seek a wife in the depths of Lower Brittany. I did acknowledge it. And then, said Emmanuel, smiling, compassion stifled every angry feeling. Gad, you will readily comprehend, my dear Count, said Lector, putting one knee over the other, and balancing his leg with a motion as regular as that of a pendulum. Our women of the court believe that the sun rises at Paris and sets at Versailles. All the rest of France is, in their idea, a Lapland, Greenland, Nova Zembla, so that they expect, as you have hinted, my dear Count, to see me bring back with me from my voyage to the pole some large hands and formidable feet. Fortunately, they are mistaken, he added with an accent half timorous, half interrogatory. Is it not so, Emmanuel? For you have told me that your sister— You will see her, replied Emmanuel. It will be a dreadful disappointment to that poor Madame de Chaulnes. It cannot be helped, and she must console herself. What is it? This question was induced by the entrance of Emmanuel's valet de chambre, who had half opened the door and remained upon the threshold, waiting, as it was then the custom of all servants in great houses, till his master should address him. What is it? Repeated Emmanuel. Mademoiselle Marguerite d'Oray requests that the Monsieur the Baron de Lector will honour her with a private interview. Me? Said Lector, rising from the sofa. Certainly, with the greatest pleasure. But no, it is a mistake, exclaimed Emmanuel. You must be mistaken, Celestine. I have the honour to assure your lordship, replied the valet de chambre, that I have correctly and faithfully executed the order which was given to me. Impossible, said Emmanuel, uneasy to the highest degree at the step his sister had ventured to take. Baron, if you will be advised by me, you will send this little simpleton upon his business. By no means, replied Lector. What does this bluebird of a brother mean? Celestine? Did you not call this lad Celestine? Emmanuel impatiently bowed his head in the affirmative. Well then, Celestine, tell my lovely betrothed that I throw myself at her knees, at her feet, and that I await her orders, either to go to her or to receive her here. And there, take this for the charges of your embassy. He threw him his purse. And you, Count, rejoined Lector, I trust that you have confidence enough in me to permit this tete-a-tete? But it is so perfectly absurd. Not at all, replied Lector. On the contrary, it is perfectly befitting. I am not a crowned head, that I should marry a woman upon her portrait and by proxy. I wish to see her in person. Come, Emmanuel, he continued, pushing his friend towards a side door that he might not meet his sister. Come now, tell me frankly, in confidence between ourselves, Is there any deformity?" "Why, no, by heaven," replied the young count. "No, on the contrary, she is as lovely as an angel." "Well then," said the Baron, "what does all this opposition mean? Come, now be gone, or must I call my guards?" "No, but on my word, I am afraid that this little simpleton, who has not the slightest notion of the world, is coming to destroy all the things that have been arranged between us." "Oh, if that is all you fear," replied Lector, opening the door, "you may be perfectly at ease. I like the brother too well not to let over some caprice. Some extraordinary fancies in the sister, and I pledge you my word as a gentleman, unless the devil should play us some strange trick, whom I trust is at this moment fully occupied in some other corner of the world, that Mademoiselle Marguerite d'Oray shall be Madame the Baroness de Lector, and that in a month you shall have your regiment." This promise appeared in some degree to pacify Emmanuel, who allowed himself to be pushed out of the door without making further difficulty. Lector immediately ran to a looking-glass to repair the slight traces of disorder which the jolting over the 3 last leagues had occasioned in his dress. He had scarcely given to his hair and garments the most becoming turn and folds when the door again opened, and Celestine announced, "Mademoiselle Marguerite d'Oray." The Baron turned round and perceived his betrothed standing pale and trembling on the threshold of the door. Although the promises of Emmanuel had inspired him with some degree of hope, a certain residue of doubt had still remained on his mind, if not as to the beauty, at all events with regard to the deportation of the lady who was about to become his wife. His surprise was therefore unbounded when he saw that delicate and graceful creature standing before him, and whom the most fastidious critic of female elegance could only have reproached with being in a slight degree too pallid. Marriages, such as the one about to be contracted by Lector, were by no means rare in an age in which questions as to rank and suitability of fortune in general decided alliances between noble houses. But that which was scarcely found once in 1,000 times was that a man in the Baron's position should meet, immured in a distant province, a lady possessed of an immense fortune, and whom at the first glance he could discern was worthy, by her demeanour, her elegance, and her beauty, to shine in the most brilliant circles of the court. He, therefore, advanced towards her, no longer with a feeling of superiority as a courtier addressed a country girl, but with all the respectable ease which distinguished good society at that time. "Pardon me, mademoiselle," said he, offering her his hand to conduct her to an armchair, but which she did not accept. "It was to me to solicit the favour you have bestowed upon me, and believe me, it was the apprehension of being considered indiscreet which alone has occasioned the apparent negligence of allowing myself to be forestalled." "I truly appreciate this delicacy, sir," replied Marguerite in a trembling voice, and retreating one step she remained standing. "It strengthens me still more in the confidence which, without having seen you, without knowing you, I had placed in your honour and good faith." "Whatever aim this confidence may have had, I am honoured by it, mademoiselle, and I will endeavour to render myself worthy of it. But, good heaven, what can so affect you?" "Nothing, sir, nothing," replied Marguerite, endeavouring to overcome her emotion. "But it is that I have to tell you but really, I am not sufficiently mistress of myself to—" She staggered, and appeared as if about to fall. The Baron sprang toward her to offer his support, but he had scarcely touched her when a flush of crimson suffused the cheeks of the young girl, and with a feeling which might be attributed as well to modesty as to repugnance, she disengaged herself from his arms. Lector had taken her hand and conducted her to a chair against which she leaned, but would not seat herself in it. Good God, explained the Baron, still retaining her hand. It must then be something very difficult to utter that has brought you hither, or, without my at all suspecting it, has my being affianced to you already conferred upon me the imposing air of a husband? Marguerite made another effort to withdraw her hand from the Baron, and which induced the latter to observe it. How, said he, not satisfied with having the most adorable of faces, the elegant figure of a fairy, but you must have such lovely hands, hands perfectly royal in their shape. Why, 'tis enough to make me expire at once. I trust, Monsieur le Baron, rejoined Marguerite, and making a last effort, she withdrew her hand from his grasp, that the words with which you are now addressing me are merely words of gallantry. No, by my soul, they are the sincere truth. Well then, I hope, should it be, which I much doubt, that you really think that which you have been pleased to say, I trust. I say that such motives will not lead you to attach a higher value to the union which has been projected. They will indeed, and that I swear to you. And yet, continued Marguerite, gasping for breath, so much was her heart oppressed, and yet, sir, you consider marriage as a solemn matter. That is as it may be, smilingly replied Lector. For example, if I were about to marry an old dowager. In short, rejoined Marguerite, in a more determined tone, I beg your pardon, sir, if I have been mistaken. I thought perhaps that, with regard to the alliance proposed between us, you had formed some idea of reciprocity of feeling. Never, cried Lector, interrupting her, for he appeared as eager to avoid the frank explanation which Marguerite desired as she seemed to provoke it. Never, and above all, since I have seen you, I could not hope to be worthy of your love. And yet my name, my position in society, notwithstanding I should fail to influence your heart, may yet give me a title to your hand. But how, sir, said Marguerite timidly, how can you separate the one from the other? As do 3/4 of the people who get married, mademoiselle, replied Lector, with a carelessness which would have at once deterred the confidence of a woman less candid than Marguerite. A man marries in order to have a wife, the wife to have a husband. It is a social compact, an arrangement of convenience. What can love have to do in a matter of this nature? Your pardon, sir, perhaps I have not clearly expressed my meaning, continued Marguerite, making an effort to control her feelings and to conceal from the man upon whom her future fate depended the impression his words had produced upon her mind. But you must attribute my hesitation, sir, to the timidity of a young girl compelled by imperious circumstances to speak on such a subject. Not at all, mademoiselle, replied Lector, bowing and giving to his voice a tone which nearly approached raillery. On the contrary, you speak like Clarissa Harlowe, and all you say is as clear as daylight. God has endowed me with a mind sufficiently quick-sighted perfectly to comprehend things which are but hinted at. How, sir, cried Marguerite, you comprehend that I have the intention of saying, and you allow me to continue, how would it be if, on looking deeply into my heart and interrogating all its feelings, I found it impossible to love the person who has been presented to me as my future husband? Why, replied Lector in the same sarcastic tone in which he had before spoken, in my opinion the best course of pursuit would be not to tell him of it. And why not, sir? Because it would be really too simple. And if that avowal were made not from simplicity, but from delicacy, if I added, and may the shame of such an avowal fall back on those who compel me to make it, if I added, sir, that I have loved, that I still love. Oh, some little romance, is it not? Said Lector, carelessly crossing his leg and playing with the frill of his shirt. Upon my honour, the race of little cousins is an accursed one, but fortunately we know that these ephemeral attachments are, and there is not a schoolgirl who, after the holidays, does not return to her convent with a passion in her little heart. "Unfortunately for me," replied Marguerite, with a voice as sorrowful and grave as that of the Baron was sarcastic and light. "Unfortunately, I am no longer a schoolgirl, sir, and although still young, I have long ago passed the age of childish games and infantile attachment. When I speak to the man who does me the honour to solicit my hand and to offer me his name, of my love for another, he ought to understand that I am speaking of a serious, profound, and eternal love. Of one of those passions, in fine, which leave their traces in the heart and imprint them there for ever." "The devil!" exclaimed Lector, as if beginning to attach some importance to Marguerite's confession. "Why, this is perfectly pastoral. But let us see, is it a young man whom one can receive at one's house?" "Oh, sir," cried Marguerite, catching at the hope which these words seemed to inspire. "Oh, believe me, he is the most estimable being, the most devoted soul." "Why? I am not asking you to tell me this. I was not speaking of the quality of his heart. He has all these, of course, that's perfectly understood. I ask whether he is noble, if he is of good race, in short, whether a woman of quality could acknowledge him, and that without degrading her husband. His father, whom he lost when very young, and who was my father's friend from infancy, was a counsellor at the court of René's." "Nobility of the bar!" exclaimed Lector, dropping his nether lip with a contemptuous shrug. "I would rather it was otherwise. Is he a knight of Malta at least?" "He was educated for a military life." "Oh, then, we must get a regiment for him, to give him rank and standing in society." "Well, that's all arranged, and it is well. Now listen to me. He will absent himself for 6 months merely for decency's sake, will obtain leave of absence, no difficult matter now as we are not at war. He will get himself presented to you for form's sake by some mutual friend, and then all will go on all rightly." "I do not understand you, sir," replied Marguerite, looking at the Baron with an expression of profound astonishment. "What I have said to you is notwithstanding perfectly pellucid," rejoined the latter with some show of impatience. "You have engagements on your side, I have on mine, but that is no reason for preventing an union which is perfectly suitable in every respect, and once accomplished, why, I think we are bound to render it as bearable as we can. Do you comprehend me now?" "Oh, pardon me, sir, pardon me," cried Marguerite, starting back, as though these words had outraged her. "I have been very imprudent, very culpable, perhaps, but whatever I may have been, I did not dream I could have merited such gross an insult. Oh, sir, the blush of shame is now scorching my cheek, but more for you than for myself. Yes, I understand you, an apparent love and a concealed one, the face of vice and the mask of virtue, and it is to me, the daughter of the Marquis d'Ore, that so shameful, so humiliating, so infamous a bargain is proposed. Oh," continued she, falling into an armchair and hiding her face with both her hands, "I must then be the most unfortunate, most contemptible lost creature. Oh, my God, my God!" "Emmanuel, Emmanuel!" cried the Baron, opening the door, at which he rightly suspected Marguerite's brother had remained. "Come in, my dear friend. Your sister is attacked with spasms. These things ought to be attended to, or they may become chronic. Madame du Moulin died of them. Here, take my scent bottle and let her smell at it. As to myself, I am going down into the park. If you have nothing else to do, you can rejoin me there, and bring me, if you please, news of your sister." Saying these words, the Baron d'Elector left the room with miraculous calmness, leaving Marguerite and Emmanuel together. "Do as you will, heap wrongs on wrongs upon me. It shall not anger me, I tell thee, Claudius. Thou art enshrined in a holy circle my foot can never pass. nor taunt, nor insult can e'er induce this hand to raise against thee. Therefore be satisfied. Once more I tell Theo I will not fight with thee. Old Play. On the day on which the interview between Marguerite and Baron de Lecter had taken place, the result of which had proved so diametrically opposed to the hopes and expectations of the young girl, on that day at 4 o'clock the dinner bell recalled the Baron to the castle. Emmanuel did the honours at the table, for the Marchioness could not leave her husband, and Marguerite had requested permission not to come downstairs. The other guests were the notary, the relations of the family, and the witnesses. The repast was a gloomy one, notwithstanding the imperturbable gaiety of Lecter, but it was evident that by this joyous humour, so stirring that it appeared feverish, he strove to stun his own feelings. From time to time, indeed, his boisterous liveliness failed all at once, like a lamp the oil of which is nearly extinguished, and then it suddenly bursts forth again, as doth the flame when it devours its last element. At 7 o'clock they rose from table and went into the drawing-room. It would be difficult to form an idea of the strange aspect which the old castle then presented, the vast apartments of which were hung with damask draperies, with Gothic designs and ornaments from the furniture of the times of Louis XIII and Louis XIV. They had been so long closed that they appeared unaccustomed to the presence of living beings, and therefore, notwithstanding the abundance of chandeliers with which the servants had adorned the rooms, the feeble and vacillating light of wax candles was insufficient to illuminate the vast rooms, and in which the voice resounded as under the arches of a cathedral. The small number of the guests, who were to be joined during the evening by some 3 or 4 gentlemen of the neighbourhood, increased the gloom which appeared to hover over the emblazoned columns of the castle. In the centre of one of the salons, the same one in which Emmanuel, at the moment after his arrival from Paris, had received Captain Paul, was placed a table prepared with such solemnity, on which was laid a closed portfolio, which, to the eyes of a stranger ignorant of all that was preparing, might as well have enclosed a death warrant or a marriage contract. In the midst of these grave aspects and gloomy impressions, from time to time a shrill mocking laugh would reach the ears of a group of persons whispering to each other. It proceeded from Lecter, who was amusing himself at the expense of some good country gentlemen, without any respect for the feelings of Emmanuel, upon whom a portion of his raillery necessarily recoiled. He would, however, every now and then cast an anxious glance around the room, and then a gloomy cloud would prevail his features, for he saw not either his father-in-law or the Marchioness or Marguerite enter the room. As we have already stated, that neither of them had been present at the dinner table, and his interview with the latter had not, however careless he endeavoured to appear, left him without some uneasiness with regard to the signing of the contract, which was to take place during the evening. Neither was Emmanuel exempt from all anxiety, and he had just determined to go up to his sister's apartment when in passing through one of the rooms he saw Lecter, who made a sign to him to draw near. "By heaven, you have come in the nick of time, my dear Count," said he to him, while appearing to pay the greatest attention to the good country gentleman who was talking to him, and of whom he seemed on terms of perfect intimacy. "Here is Monsieur Dinoze, who is relating to me some very curious things, upon my word. But do you know," continuing he, turning to the narrator, "this is most admirable and highly interesting. I also have marshes and ponds, and I must ask my steward as soon as I get to Paris to tell me where they are situated. And do you catch many wild ducks in this way?" "An immense quantity," replied the gentleman, and with the accent of perfect simplicity which proved that Lecter could, without fear of detection, for some time longer sustain the conversation in the same tone. What then is this miraculous mode of sporting? Required Emmanuel. Only imagine, my dear friend, replied Lector, with the most complete sang-froid, that this gentleman gets into the water up to his neck. At what time of the year, may I ask, without being indiscreet? In the month of December and January. It is impossible that anything could be more picturesque. I was saying, then, that he gets into the water up to his neck, puts a large toadstool over his head, and conceals himself among the bulrushes. This so completely metamorphoses him that the ducks do not recognize him and allow him to come close to them. Did you not say so? As near as I am to you. Bah, really, exclaimed Emmanuel, and this gentleman kills just as many as he pleases? I kill them by dozens, said he proudly, being enchanted by the attention which the two young men were paying to the recital of his exploits. It must be a delightful thing for your good lady, if she is fond of ducks, said Emmanuel. She adores them, said Monsieur de Nauzé. I hope you will do me the honour to introduce me to so interesting a person, said Lector, bowing. Undoubtedly, Baron. I swear to you, said Lector, that instantly on my return to Paris, I will speak of this sport in the King's dressing-room, and I am persuaded that His Majesty himself will make a trial of it in one of his large ponds at Versailles. I beg your pardon, dear Marquis, said Emmanuel, taking Lector's arm and whispering in his ear. This is one of our country neighbours whom we could not do otherwise than invite on so solemn an occasion. It requires no apology, my dear friend, said Lector, using the same precaution not to be heard by the party in question. You would have been decidedly wrong had you deprived me of so amusing a companion. He is an appendage to the dower of my future wife, and I should have been greatly chagrined not to have made his acquaintance. Monsieur de la Jarrie, said a servant, opening the door. A sporting companion, said Lector. No, replied Monsieur de Nauzé. He is a traveller. Aha! Exclaimed Lector, with an accent which announced that the newly arrived personage was to be the subject of a new attack. He had hardly made the ejaculation when the person announced entered the room, muffled up in a Polish dress lined with fur. Ah, my dear La Jarrie, cried Emmanuel, advancing to meet him, and holding out his hand to him. But how are you befurred? Upon my honour, you look like the Tsar Peter. It is, replied La Jarrie, shivering, although the weather was by no means cold, because, when one arrives from Naples, Peru... Ah, the gentleman has arrived from Naples, said Lector, joining in the conversation. Direct, sir? Did you ascend Vesuvius, sir? No, I was satisfied with looking at it from my window, and then, continued the traveller, with a tone of contempt most humiliating to the volcano, Vesuvius is not the most curious thing that is to be seen at Naples. A mountain that smokes. My chimney does as much when the wind is in the wrong quarter. And besides, Madame La Jarrie was dreadfully alarmed at the idea of an eruption. But of course you visited the Grotto del Cane, continued Lector. To what purpose, rejoined La Jarrie? To see an animal that has vapours? Give a pill to the first poodle that passes, and he will do as much. And then, Madame La Jarrie has quite a passion for dogs, and it would have given her pain to witness so cruel an exhibition. I hope, however, that a man of science like yourself, said Emmanuel, bowing, did not neglect the solfatara. Who, I? I would not set my foot there. I can very easily imagine what 3 or 4 acres of sulphur looks like, the sole produce of which is a few millions of matches. Moreover, Madame La Jarrie cannot support the odour of sulphur. What do you think of our new friend, said Emmanuel, leading Lector into the room in which the contract was to be signed. I know not whether it is because I saw the other first, but I decidedly prefer Nauzé. The door again opened, and the servant loudly announced, Monsieur Paul. Eh? Exclaimed Emmanuel, turning round. Who is this? Inquired Lector listlessly, Another country neighbour? No, this is quite another sort of person, replied Emmanuel with agitation. How does this man dare to present himself here? Aha, a plebeian, eh? A common person, is he not? But rich, I suppose? No? A poet? Musician? Painter? Well, I can assure you, Emmanuel, that they are beginning to receive this sort of person, that accursed philosophy has confounded everything. It cannot be helped, my dear friend. We must courageously make up our minds to it. We have come to that. An artist sits down by a great noble, elbows him, touches the corner of his hat to him, remains seated when the others rise. They converge together on court matters, they jest, they joke, they squabble. It is bon ton, though decidedly bad taste. You are mistaken, lector, replied Emmanuel. He is neither poet, painter, or musician. He is a man to whom I must speak alone. Just lead off Nose while I do the same with Lajari. Upon this, the two young gentlemen took each of the country neighbours by the arm and drew them away into another room, talking of shooting and travelling. The side door through which they went out had scarcely closed upon them when Paul appeared at the principal one. He went into the room he already knew, each corner of which concealed a door. The one led to a library, the other to the room in which he had been shut up on his first visit, awaiting the result of the conference between Marguerite and Emmanuel, and then approaching the table. He remained there for a moment, looking attentively at the two doors as though he had expected to see one of them open. His hope was not fallacious. In a few moments that of the library was opened, and he perceived a white form standing within it. He rushed towards it. "Is it you, Marguerite?" said he. "Yes," replied a trembling voice. "Well?" I told him all. And in 10 minutes the contract is to be signed. I suspected as much. He is a miserable wretch. What's to be done? Cried the young girl. Take courage, Marguerite. Courage? Oh, it now fails me entirely. There is that which will restore it, said Paul, handing her a letter. What does this letter contain? The name of the village in which you will find your son, and the name of the woman in whose home he has been concealed. My son, oh, you are my guardian angel, cried Marguerite, endeavouring to kiss the hand which held the paper to her. Silence, somebody is coming. Whatever may happen, you will find one at Achard's. Marguerite suddenly closed the door without replying to him, for she had heard the sound of her brother's footsteps. Paul turned round and went to meet him, which he did near the table. I expected you at another time, sir, and in less numerous company, said Emmanuel, who was the first to speak. It appears to me that we are alone at this moment, said Paul, glancing around the room. Yes, but it is here that the contract is to be signed, and in an instant this room will be full. But many things may be said in an instant, Count. You are right, sir, but you must meet a man who does not require more than an instant to comprehend them. I am listening, said Paul. You spoke to me of letters, rejoined Emmanuel, drawing nearer to him and lowering his voice. It is true, said Paul with the same calmness. You fixed a price upon these letters. That is also true. Well then, if you are a man of honour, for that price, for the sum enclosed in this pocket-book, you ought now to be prepared to give them up. Yes, sir, yes, replied Paul. The case stood thus as long as I believed your sister, forgetful of the vows she had made, the faults she had committed, and even the child to which she had given birth, was seconding your ambition by her perjury. Then I thought it would be a sufficiently bitter fate for the poor child to enter upon life without a name and without a family, not to allow him to enter it without a fortune also, and I then demanded of you, it is true, that sum in exchange for the letters in my possession. But now the state of things is altered, sir. I saw your sister throw herself upon her knees before you. I heard her entreat you not to force her into this infamous marriage, and neither prayers nor tears nor supplications could make any impression on your heart. It is now for me who holds your honour and the honour of your family within my hands. It is for me to save the mother from despair, as I would have saved the child from penury and misery. Those letters, sir, shall be delivered to you when you shall upon this table, instead of signing the marriage contract of your sister with the Baron d'Elector, sign that of Mademoiselle Marguerite d'Ore with Anatole de Lusignan. Never, sir, never. You shall not have them excepting on that condition, Count. Oh, I shall perhaps find some mode of compelling you to return them. I know not any, coldly replied Paul. Will you, sir, deliver those letters to me? Count, replied Paul with an expression of countenance which under the circumstances was perfectly inexplicable to Emmanuel. Count, listen to me. Will you return those letters, sir? Count, yes or no? No, said Paul calmly. Well then, sir, you wear a sword as I do. We are both gentlemen, or rather I would believe you to be such. Let us leave the house together, and one of us shall return alone, and he, being unfettered and powerful from the death of the other, shall then do as best he pleases. I regret I cannot accept the offer, Count. How? You wear that uniform, that cross upon your breast, by your side that sword, and you refuse to duel? Yes, Emmanuel, I do refuse it, because I cannot raise my sword against you, Count. Believe me, I entreat you. You cannot fight with me? I cannot upon my honour. You cannot fight with me, you say? At this moment, a person who had entered the room without being perceived burst into a loud laugh, close behind the two young men. Paul and Emmanuel turned hastily round. Lecter was standing close to them. But, said Paul, pointing to Lecter, I can fight with him, for he is a miserable and infamous wretch. A burning flush passed over Lecter's features, like the reflection of a flame. He made a step towards Paul and then stopped. It is well, sir, said he. Send your second to Emmanuel, and they can arrange this matter. You will understand that between us the affair is merely deferred, said Emmanuel to Paul. Silence, replied Paul. They are announcing your mother. Yes, silence, and tomorrow we meet again, Lector, added Emmanuel. Let us go to receive my mother. If this contract thou hold'st me to, abide thou the result. Answer to heaven for what I suffer. Act, prepare thyself for such calamity to fall on me, and those whose evil have linked them with me, as no past mishap, however rare and marvellously sad, can parallel. Knowles, The Hunchback. At the moment that Paul went into the study, the Marchioness appeared at the door of the drawing-room, followed by the notary and several persons who had been invited to be present at the signing of the contract. Notwithstanding the nature of the meeting, the Marchioness had not considered it proper to lay aside even for one evening her mourning garments, and dressed in complete black, as she had been always during 20 years, she came into the room a few moments before the Marquis. None of the persons present, not even her son, had seen the Marquis for many years. Such attention was it in those days paid to ancient forms that the Marchioness would not allow the marriage contract of her daughter to be signed without the head of the family, although deprived of reason, being present at the ceremony. However little accustomed Lecter was to feel intimidated, the Marchioness produced upon him the effect which she did on every one that approached her, and on seeing her enter the room with so grave and dignified an aspect, he bowed to her with a feeling of profound respect. I am grateful to you, gentlemen, said the Marchioness, bowing to the persons who accompanied her, for the honour you have been pleased to confer on me, by being present at the betrothal of Mademoiselle Marguerite d'Oray with the Baron d'Elector. I, in consequence, was desirous that the Marquis, although suffering from illness, should also be present at this meeting, to thank you, at least by his presence, if he cannot do so verbally. You are all aware of his unfortunate malady, and you will, therefore, not be astonished should some disjointed words— Yes, madam, said Lecter, interrupting her. We know the misfortune which has befallen him, and we admire the devoted wife, who for 20 years has borne half the weight of this sad visitation. You see, madam, said Emmanuel, addressing in his turn, and kissing the hand of his mother, all the world bows down in admiration of your conjugal piety. Where is Marguerite? Murmured the Marchioness in a hair whisper. She was here not a moment ago, said Emmanuel. Let her know that we are all assembled, rejoined the Marchioness in the same tone. A servant then announced the Marquis d'Oray. All present drew to one side, so as to leave free passage from the door, and all eyes were directed to the spot at which this new personage was to appear. It was not long before their curiosity was satisfied. The Marquis came in almost immediately, supported by 2 servants. He was an old man whose countenance, notwithstanding that the traces of suffering had deeply furrowed it, still retained the noble and dignified appearance which had rendered him one of the most distinguished men at the court of Louis XV. His large, hollow and feverish eyes glanced around the assembly with a strange expression of astonishment. He was dressed in his costume of steward of the household, wore the order of the Holy Ghost suspended from his neck, and that of St. Louis at his buttonhole. He advanced slowly, and without uttering a word, the 2 servants led him forward amidst the most profound silence to an armchair, in which he seated himself, and the servants left the room. The Marchioness then placed herself at his right hand. The notary opened the portfolio, drew it from the marriage contract, and read it aloud. The Marquis and Marchioness made over the sum of 500,000 francs to Lector, and gave a like sum to Marguerite as her dowry. During the whole time occupied by the reading of the contract, the Marchioness, notwithstanding her great self-command, had betrayed some symptoms of uneasiness. But just at the moment when the notary had placed the contract open on the table, Emmanuel returned and approached his mother. "And Marguerite?" said the Marchioness. "She will be here instantly, madam," murmured Marguerite, half opening the door and clasping her hands. The Marchioness pretended not to hear her, and pointed with her finger at the pen. "Baron, it is you who are first to sign." Lector immediately approached the table and signed the contract. "Madam," cried Marguerite in a tone of supplication, and advancing one step towards her mother. "Pass the pen to your betrothed Baron," said the Marchioness. The Baron walked round the table and drew near to Marguerite. "Madam," again cried the latter, with an accent so melancholy that it struck the heart of every person present, and even the Marquis himself raised his head. "Sign," said the Marchioness, pointing to the marriage contract. "Oh, my father!" exclaimed Marguerite, throwing herself at the feet of the Marquis. "What does this mean?" said the Marchioness, leaning upon the arm of the Marquis's chair and bending over him. "Are you mad, mademoiselle?" "My father, oh, my father!" again cried Marguerite, throwing her arms around him. "My father, have pity, save your daughter." "Marguerite," murmured the Marchioness in a threatening accent. "Madam," replied Marguerite, "I cannot address myself to you. Permit me, then, to employ my father's pity. Unless," she added, pointing to the notary with a firm and determined gesture, "you would prefer my invoking the protection of the law." "Come, come," said the Marchioness, rising, and in a tone of bitter irony, "this is a family scene, and which, although highly interesting to near relations, must be sufficiently tedious to strangers. Gentlemen, you will find refreshments in the adjoining rooms. My son, conduct these gentlemen and do the honours. Baron, I must beg you to pardon for a short time." Emmanuel and Lecter bowed in silence and withdrew, followed by all the company. The Marchioness remained motionless until the last of them had withdrawn, and then she closed all the doors leading into the room. When, returning to the Marquis, whom Marguerite still held clasped in her arms, and now she said, "that there is no one present except those who have the right to lay their commands upon you. Sign that paper, mademoiselle, or leave the room. For pity's sake, madam, for pity's sake, do not compel me to commit so infamous an act." "Have you not heard me?" said the Marchioness, giving to her voice an imperative tone, which she thought impossible to be resisted. "Or must I repeat my words? Sign or leave the room." "Oh, my father," cried Marguerite, "mercy, mercy! No, it shall not be said that, after having been banished from my father's presence for 10 years, I was torn from his arms the first time I again beheld him, and that, before he had recognized me, before he has embraced me. Oh, father, father, it is your daughter." "What is that voice that is imploring me?" murmured the Marquis. "Who is this child who calls me father?" "That voice," said the Marchioness, seizing the arm of her daughter, "is a voice that is raised against the rights of nature. That child is a rebellious daughter." "My father," cried Marguerite imploringly, "look at me. Oh, my father, save me, defend me. I am Marguerite." "Marguerite, Marguerite," stammered the Marquis. "I had formerly a child of that name." It is I, rejoined Marguerite. "I am your child. I am your daughter." "There are no children but those who obey. Obey, and you have then the right to call yourself our daughter," rejoined the Marchioness. "To you, my father, yes, to you I am ready to obey. But you do not command this sacrifice. You do not wish that I should be unhappy, unhappy even to despair, unhappy even to death." "Come, come," said the Marquis, holding her in his turn and pressing her to his heart. "Oh, this is a delicious and unknown feeling to me, and now— Wait, wait." He pressed his hand to his forehead. "It seems to me that I recollect." "Sir," cried the Marchioness, "tell her that she ought to obey, that the malediction of God awaits rebellious children. Tell her that, rather than to encourage her in her impiety." The Marquis slowly raised his head and fixed his piercing eyes upon his wife, and then slowly pronounced the following words: "Take care, madam, take care. Have I not told you that I begin to remember?" And then again bending down his head to that of Marguerite, so that his grey hairs mingled with the dark tresses of his daughter, "Speak, speak," said he. "What is it that disturbs you, my child? Tell me all." "Oh, I am most unhappy." "Everyone, then, is unhappy here," exclaimed the Marquis, "whether the hair be grey or black, an old man or a child. Oh, and I also, I am unhappy, be assured." "Sir, go upstairs into your room again, you must," said the Marchioness. "Yes, that I may again be face to face with you, shut up like a prisoner. That may be very well, when I am mad." "Yes, yes, my father, you are right. My mother has devoted herself to you long enough. It is now time that your daughter should perform that duty. Take me with you, father. I will not leave you day or night. You will only have to make a sign to utter a word, and I will serve you on my knees." "Oh, you would not have the strength to do it." "Yes, yes, my father, I will, as truly as I am your daughter." The Marchioness wrung her hands with impatience. "If you are my daughter, how is it that I have not seen you for 10 years?" "Because I was told that you would not see me, my father. Because they told me that you did not love me." "You were told that I would not see you?" Not see that angel face?" said he, taking her head between his hands and looking at her with intense auction. "They told you that? They told you that a poor condemned soul did not wish for heaven? Who was it then that told you a father would not see his child? Who has dared to say, 'Child, your father loves you not'?" "I," said the Marchioness again, endeavouring to take Marguerite from her father's arms. "You?" exclaimed the Marquis, interrupting her. "It was you? You then had been confided the fatal mission of deceiving me in all my affections. All my griefs then must find their source in you. You wish then now to break the father's heart of 20 years ago you did that of a husband." "You are delirious, sir," said the Marchioness, loosening the arm of her daughter, and going to the right side of the Marquis, she whispered, "Be silent." "No, madam, no. I am not now delirious," replied the Marquis. No, say that, and it will be the truth, say that I am now between an angel who would recall me to reason and a demon who wishes me again to become insane. No, I am not mad. Do you wish that I should prove it to you?" He rose, supporting himself on the arms of his chair. "Must I speak to you of letters, of adultery, of a duel?" "I say," said the Marchioness, grasping his arm, "I tell you that you are more forsaken by heaven than ever, when you utter such things, without reflecting on to whose ears are listening. Cast down your eyes, sir. Look who is standing yonder, and then dare assert that you are not mad." "You are right," said the Marquis, falling back into his chair. "Your mother is right," continued he, addressing Marguerite. "I am mad. And you must not believe what I say, but what she says. Your mother is devotedness, virtue itself, and therefore she has not sleepless nights, nor remorse, nor madness. What does your mother wish?" "My misery, father, my everlasting misery." "And how can I prevent this misery?" said the unhappy old man, with a most heart-rending anguish. "How can I, a poor insane old man, prevent it? Who thinks he always sees the blood issuing from a wound, who thinks he constantly hears a voice proceeding from a tomb. Oh, you can do all that, say but one word and I am saved. They wish me to marry." The Marquis listily reclined his head on the back of his chair. "Listen to me. They wish me to marry to a man who I do not love. Do you understand me? To a wretch. And you have been brought here, placed in that armchair before the table, you, my father, to sign this infamous contract. This contract which I now hand to you." "Without consulting me," said the Marquis, taking the contract. "Without asking me whether I will or I will not. Do they believe me dead? And if they think me dead, do they fear me less than they would a spectre? This marriage would cause you misery, you say." "My eternal misery," exclaimed Marguerite. "The marriage then shall not take place." "I have pledged your word and mine," said the Marchioness, and with the more energy that she felt her influence over her husband about to escape her. "This marriage, I tell you, shall not take place," replied the Marquis, in a tone louder than that of his wife. "It is too dreadful a thing," continued he in a gloomy sepulchral tone, "to be permitted. A marriage in which a wife loves not her husband, why, it causes madness. As to myself, the Marchioness has always loved me, and loves me faithfully. That which drove me mad, oh, that was a different matter." A flash of diabolical joy shot from the eyes of the Marchioness, for she at once saw from the violence of the expressions used by her husband, and the terror depicted on his features, that his insanity was about to return. "This contract," said the Marquis, and he raised it in his hands as if about to tear it. The Marchioness eagerly caught his hand. Marguerite appeared to be hanging by a thread between heaven and hell. "That which drives me mad," reiterated the Marquis, "is a tomb which widely opens, a spectre that issues from the earth. It is a phantom that speaks to me and says, "Your life is in my hands," murmured the Marchioness in his ear, repeating the last words of the dying Morlaix. "I could take it." "Do you hear that?" cried the Marquis, raising, as if about to rush from the room. "My father, oh my father, recall your senses. There is no tomb, there is no spectre, there is no phantom." Those words were uttered by the Marchioness. "But I wish you to live," continued the latter, concluding the sentence she had begun, "to forgive me as I forgive you." "Pardon, Morlaix, pardon," cried the Marquis, falling back into his armchair, his hair standing on end with terror and the perspiration streaming from his forehead. "Oh, father, father, you see that your father is altogether deranged," said the Marchioness triumphantly. "Say no more to him." "Oh," cried Marguerite, "God will, I trust, perform a miracle. My love, my caresses, my tears will restore him to reason." "Make the attempt," replied the Marchioness coldly, abandoning to her care the Marquis, who was powerless, speechless, and almost without consciousness. "Oh, my poor father!" exclaimed Marguerite in a tone of agony. The Marquis remained perfectly impassible. "Sir," said the Marchioness, in an imperative manner. Eh?" cried the Marquis, shuddering. "Save me, oh, save me, father!" cried Marguerite, wringing her hands and throwing herself back in despair. "Take this pen and sign," said the Marchioness. "You must. It is my will." "Now I am lost indeed," cried Marguerite, overwhelmed with terror and feeling that she had no longer strength to continue the struggle. But at the moment that the Marquis, overpowered, had written the first letters of his name, when the Marchioness was congratulating herself on the victory she had obtained, and Marguerite was about to leave the room in despair, an unexpected incident suddenly changed the scene. The door of the study opened, and Paul, who had been anxiously watching, though invisible, the whole of this terrible conflict, issued from it. "Madam," he said, "one word before this contract is signed." "Who is it calls me?" said the Marchioness, endeavouring to distinguish in the distance that separated them the person who had thus spoken and who was stood in a dark corner of the room. "I know that voice!" exclaimed the Marquis, shuddering as if seared by a red-hot iron. Paul advanced 3 paces, and the light from the lustre hanging in the centre of the room fell full upon him. "It is a spectre!" cried the Marchioness in her turn, struck with the resemblance of the youth which stood before her to her former lover. "I know that face!" cried the Marquis, believing that he saw the man whom he had killed. My God, protect me!" stammered Marguerite, raising her eyes and hands to heaven. Morlaix," said the Marquis, raising and advancing towards Paul. "Morlaix, pardon, mercy!" And he fell at full length upon the floor. "My father!" cried Marguerite, rushing to his assistance. At that moment a servant entered the room, with terror in his looks, and addressing the Marchioness said, "Madam, Achard has sent a request that the priest and the doctor of the castle may instantly be ordered to attend him. He is dying." "Tell him," replied the Marchioness, pointing to her husband, whom Marguerite was vainly endeavouring to restore to consciousness, "that they are both obliged to remain here to attend upon the Marquis." And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Shakespeare. As has been seen by the end of the preceding chapter, God, by one of those extraordinary combinations which short-sighted man almost always attribute to chance, had summoned to his presence, and almost at the same time, the souls of the noble Marquis d'Ore and the poor low-born Achard. We have seen that the former, struck by the sight of Paul, the living portrait of his father, as if by a thunderbolt fell at the feet of the young man, who was himself terrified at the effect his appearance had produced. As to Achard, the circumstances, which had hastened his death, although differing in their nature and from very opposite feelings, had arisen from the same fatal causes and had been brought about by the same individual. The sight of Paul had created dire emotions in the breasts both of the Marquis and Achard. On the former, from excess of terror, on the latter, from excess of joy. During the day, which had preceded the intended signing of the contract, Achard had felt himself more feeble than usual. Notwithstanding this, he had not neglected in the evening to crawl to his master's grave, there to put up his accustomed prayer. Thence he had observed with a devotion more profound than ever that ever new and splendid spectacle, the sun sinking into the ocean. He had followed the decline of its empurpled light, and as though the vast torch of the world had drawn his soul towards it, he had felt his strength extinguished with its last rays, so that when the servant from the castle came in the evening at the accustomed time to receive his orders, not finding him there in his house, had sought for him within the park. And as it was well known that he generally walked in that direction, found him lying extended at the foot of the great oak tree upon the grave of his master, and deprived of consciousness. Thus did he remain constant to the last in that religious devoutness he had vowed to his master's tomb, and which had been the exclusive feeling of the last years of his life. The servant took him in his arms and carried him into his house, and then, terrified at the unexpected incident, had hastened to the Marchioness to inform her that Achard required the attendance of the physician and the priest, which message was delivered to her by the servant then in waiting, to which the Marchioness refused to accede, under the pretext that they were required as urgently by the Marquis as the old servant, and that superiority of rank, powerful even when at the point of death, gave her husband the right of first employing. But the intelligence which had been announced to the Marchioness at the moment of that dreadful agony, into which their various interests and various passions had thrown the actors in this family drama, of which we have become the historian, this intelligence, we say, was heard by Paul. Conceiving that the signature of the contract had now become impossible from the state of the Marquis, he had only allowed himself time to whisper to Marguerite that should she need his assistance, she would find him at Achard's cottage, and then he rushed into the park, and winding his way amidst its serpentine walks and thickets, with the skill of a seer man who reads his path in the starry firmament, he soon reached the house, entered it, panting from his rapid course, and found Achard just as he was recovering from his fainting fit, and clasped him in his arms. The delight again of seeing him renewed the strength of the old man, who now felt certain of having a friendly hand to close his eyes. "Oh, it is you, exclaimed the old man. "I did not hope to see you again. And could you possibly believe that I should have been apprised of the state in which you were, and that I would not instantly fly to your assistance? But I knew not where to find you, where I could send to tell you that I wished once more to see you before I died. I was at the castle, father, where I learned that you were dangerously ill, and I hastened hither." "And how was it that you were at the castle?" said the old man, with amazement. Paul related to him all that had occurred. "Eternal Providence," cried the old man, when Paul had concluded his recital, "how hidden and inevitable are thy decrees! Thou, who after 20 years hast conducted his youth to the cradle of his infancy, and hast killed the assassin of the father by the mere aspect of the son." Yes, thus it happens," replied Paul, "and it is Providence. Also who conducts me to you that I might save you, for I have heard and refused to send you the physician and the priest." "According to common justice," rejoined Achard, "they might have made a fair division. The Marquis, who fears death, might have retained the physician, while to me, who am tired of life, they might have sent the priest. I can go on horseback, said Paul, and in less than an hour. In an hour it will be too late, said the dying man, in an enfeebled voice. A priest only. I ask but for a priest. Father, replied Paul, in his sacred functions I know I cannot supply his place, but we can speak of God, of his greatness and his goodness. Yes, but let us first finish with the things of this earth, that we may then be able to turn our thoughts wholly to those of heaven. You say that, like myself, the Marquis is dying. I left him at the last agony. You know that immediately after his death, the papers which are deposited in that closet and which prove your birth are yours by right. I know it. If I die before the Marquis, to whom can I confide them? The old man sat up and pointed to a key hanging at the head of his bed. You will take that key, you will open the closet, in it you will find a casket. You are a man of honour, swear to me that you will not open that casket until the Marquis shall be dead. I swear it, said Paul solemnly, and extending his hand towards the crucifix hanging at the head of the bed. 'Tis well, replied Achard. Now I shall die in peace. You may do so, for the Son holds your hand in this world, and the Father stretches out his towards you from heaven. Do you believe, my child, that he will be satisfied with my fidelity? No king was ever so faithfully obeyed during life as he has been since his death. Yes, murmured the old man in a gloomy tone. I was but too exact in following his orders. I ought not to have suffered the duel to have taken place. I ought to have refused attending it as a witness. Hear me, Paul. It is this that I wish to have said to a priest, for it is the only thing that weighs upon my conscience. Listen, there have been moments of doubt, during which I have regarded this solitary duel as an assassination. In that case, Paul, in that case, I have not only been a witness, but an accomplice. O my second father, replied Paul, I know not whether the laws of earth are always in accordance with the laws of heaven, and whether honour, as it is considered by man, would be a virtue in the eyes of the Lord. I know not whether our holy church, an enemy of bloodshed, permits that the injured should attempt with his own hands to avenge the wrongs inflicted upon him by attacking his injurer, or if, in that case, the judgment of heaven directs the pistol ball or the sword's point. These are questions not to be decided by reasoning, but by conscience. Well, then, my conscience tells me that situated as you were, I should have done precisely as you did. Should conscience in this case mislead me, it also misled you, and in that view of the matter, I have a greater right than a priest to absolve you, and in my name and in that of my father I pardon you. Thanks, thanks, cried the old man, pressing the hands of Paul. Thanks, for these words pour consolation into the soul of a dying man. Remorse is a dreadful thing. Remorse would lead one to believe that there exists no God, for without a judge there can be no judgment. Listen to me, said Paul, in that poetic and solemn accent which was peculiar to him. I also often doubted in the existence of a God. Isolated and lost in the wide world, without a family and without a single friend, I sought for support in the Lord, and I asked of everything that encircled me some proof of his existence. Often have I arrested my steps on the foot of one of those crosses erected by the roadside, and with my eyes fixed upon the Saviour, I demanded, and with tears, to be assured of his existence and divine mission. I prayed that his eyes would deign to look upon me, that one drop of blood might fall from his wound, or that a sigh might issue from his lips. The crucifix remained motionless, and I arose, my heart being overcome with despair, saying, Did I but know where I could find my father's tomb, I would question him as Hamlet did the ghost, and he would perhaps answer me, "Poor child." Then would I enter a church, continued Paul, one of those churches of the north, gloomy, religious, Christian, and I would feel myself borne down with sorrow. But sorrow is not faith. I approached the altar. I threw myself upon my knees before the tabernacle in which God dwells. I bowed my head till it touched the marbles of the steps. And when I had thus remained prostrated for hours and lost in thought, I raised my head, hoping that the God I was seeking would at length manifest his presence to me by a ray of his glory, or by some dazzling proof of his power. But the church remained gloomy, as the cross had remained motionless. And I would then rush from its porches with insensate haste, crying, "Lord, Lord, didst thou exit? Thou would reveal thyself to man? Is it thy will, then, that men should doubt, since thou canst reveal thyself to them, but dost not?" "Beware of what you are saying, Paul," cried the old man. "Beware that the doubt thy heart contains does not attaint mine. Thou hast time left to thee to believe, whereas I am about to die." "Wait, Father, wait," continued Paul with softened voice and placid features. "I have not told you all. It was then that I said to myself, the crucifix by the roadside, the churches of the cities, are but the work of man. Let us seek God in God's own works. From that moment, my Father, began that wandering life, which will remain an eternal mystery known only to the heavens, the ocean, and myself. It led me into the solitary wilds of America, for I thought the newer a world was, the more freshly would it attain the impressions of God's hand. I did not deceive myself. There, often in those virgin forests, into which I perhaps was the first who had ever penetrated, with no shelter but the heavens, no couch but the earth, absorbed by one sole thought, I had listened to the thousand noises of a world about to sleep and nature when awakening. For a long time did I still remain without comprehending that unknown tongue, formed by the mingling of the murmur of rivers, the vapour of the lakes, the rustling of the forests, and the perfume of flowers. Finally, the veil which had obscured my eyes, and the weight which had oppressed my heart, was little by little removed, and from that time I began to believe that these noises of evening and of approaching day were but one universal hymn by which created things expressed their gratitude to the Creator. "Almighty God," cried the dying man, clasping his hands and raising his eyes to heaven with an expression of holy faith, "I cried to you from the bottomless pit, and you heard me in my distress. O my God, I thank thee." Then continued Paul with still increasing enthusiasm, "Then I sought upon the ocean, that full conviction which earth had refused to me. The earth is but a span, the ocean is immensity. The ocean is, after God himself, the grandest, the most powerful object in the universe. I have heard the ocean roar like a chafed lion, and then at the voice of its master become tranquil as a submissive dog. I have seen it rise like a Titan to scale the heavens, and then beneath the whip of the tempest moan like a weeping infant. I have seen it dashing its waves to meet the lightning, endeavouring to quench the thunder with its form, and then become smooth as a mirror and reflect even the smallest star in the heavens. Upon the land, I had become convinced of God's existence. Upon the ocean, I recognized his power. In the solitary wilds, as Moses, I had heard the voice of the Lord, but during the tempest I saw him, as did Ezekiel riding upon the wings of the storm. Thenceforward, my Father, thenceforward all doubts were driven from my mind, and from the evening of which I witnessed the first hurricane I believed and prayed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, said the dying man with ardent faith, and he continued thus the symbol of the apostles to the last word. Paul listened to him in silence, with his eyes raised to heaven, and when he had concluded, said, "It is not thus that a priest would have spoken to you, my father. For I have spoken to you as a seaman, and with a voice more accustomed to pronounce words of death than consolation. Forgive me, Father, forgive me for it." "You have made me pray and believe as you do," said the old man. "Tell me then, what more could a priest have done? What you have said is plain and grand. Let me reflect on what you have said." "Listen," said Paul, shuddering. "What is it? Did you not hear?" "No." "I thought that a voice of someone in distress called to me. There again. Did you not hear it? Now, again. It is the voice of Marguerite." "Go to her instantly," replied the old man. "I need to be alone." Paul rushed into the adjoining room, and as he entered it, he heard his name again repeated, and closed the door of the cottage. Then running to the door, he anxiously opened it, and found Marguerite upon the threshold, her strength having failed her, and she had fallen upon her knees. Save me, she cried, with an expression of profound terror on perceiving Paul, and clasped his knees. Mercy from him, and how can I expect it? By what right can I demand he should withhold his claim? The proof's once in his power. Anonymous. Paul ran to Marguerite and caught her in his arms. She was pale and ice cold. He carried her into the first room, placed her in an armchair, returned to the door which had remained opened, and closed it, and then hastened back. "What is it that so terrifies you? Who is pursuing you? And how does it happen that you come here in this unusual hour?" "Oh," exclaimed Marguerite, "at any hour, whether by day or night, I should have flown as long as the earth would have borne me. I should have flown till I had found some heart in which I could have poured forth my sorrows, an arm capable of defending me. Paul, my father is dead." "Poor child," said Paul, pressing Marguerite to his heart, "who flies from one house of death to fall into another, who leads death in the castle and finds it in the cottage." "Yes, yes," cried Marguerite, rising, still trembling with terror, and convulsively pressing Paul's arm. "Death is yonder, and I find death here. But yonder it is attended with despair and fear, while here it is met with tranquillity and hope. Oh, Paul, had you but seen that which I have seen! Tell me all that happened. You saw the terrible effect produced by your appearance and the mere sound of your voice." "Yes, I saw that." "They carried him still fainting and speechless into his own room." "It was to your mother that I spoke," said Paul. "You full well know all that had passed, for you must have heard, from the room in which you were concealed, every word we uttered. My father, my poor father, had recognized me, and I, seeing him thus, could, not repressing my uneasiness, notwithstanding the risk I ran of irritating my mother, I went up to his room. The door was locked. I knocked softly at it. He had recovered his senses, for I heard a faint voice asking, 'Who was there?' "And your mother?" said Paul eagerly. "My mother," replied Marguerite, "was no longer there, and she had locked him in as if she would have done that to a child. But when he had recognized my voice, when I told him that it was his daughter Marguerite who wished to see him, he told me that I could go into the room by going downstairs again, and that in the study I should find a private staircase which led to it. A minute afterwards I was kneeling by his bedside, and he gave me his blessing. Yes, Paul, I received his blessing before he died. His paternal benediction, which I trust will bring down the blessing of God upon my head." "Yes," said Paul, "God will pardon you. You may now feel tranquil. Weep for your father, Marguerite, but weep no longer for yourself, for you are saved." "You have heard nothing yet, Paul," exclaimed Marguerite. "Hear me still." "Proceed." "At the very moment when I was kneeling kissing the hand of my father, and thanking him for the relief he had afforded my afflicted mind, I heard my mother's footsteps on the staircase. I recognized her voice, and my father also recognized it, for he again embraced me and made a sign to me to leave him. I obeyed him, but such was my terror and confusion that I mistook the door, and instead of the staircase by which I had ascended, I found myself in a small cabinet which had no issue. I felt all around its walls, but could find no door. I was compelled to remain there. I then heard my mother, accompanied by the priest, entering my father's room. I restrained my breathing, fearing that she could hear me. I saw then through the glass window of the door, and I assure you, Paul, that she was paler than my father, who was about to die." "Gracious heaven," murmured Paul. "The priest seated himself by the bedside," continued Marguerite, so terrified that she pressed still closer against Paul. "My mother remained standing at the foot of the bed. I was there, just opposite to them, compelled to remain a witness of this mournful spectacle, without the means of retreat, a daughter obliged to hear the dying confession of his father. Was it not horrible? I fell upon my knees, closing my eyes that I might not see, praying that I might not hear, and yet in spite of myself, and this I swear to you, Paul, I saw and I heard. Oh, what I then heard can never be obliterated from my memory. I saw my father, whose recollections seemed to be inspired with a feverish strength, sit up in his bed, the paleness of death imprinted on his face. I heard him pronounce the words a duel, adultery, assassination. And at each word he uttered, I saw my mother turn pale, and paler even than before. And I heard her raise her voice so that it might drown the voice of the dying man, saying to the priest, Believe him not, reverend father. What he says is false, or rather he is mad, and he knows not what he says. Believe him not." Oh, Paul, it was a dreadful spectacle, an imperious sacrilege. A cold perspiration stood upon my forehead, and I fainted. "Justice of heaven," cried Paul. I know not how long I remained without consciousness. When I recovered my senses, the room was as silent as a tomb. My mother and the priest had disappeared, and 2 wax lights were burning near my father. I opened the door of the cabinet and cast my eyes on the bed. It appeared to me that I could distinguish beneath the sheet, which completely covered it, the stiffened form of a corpse. I divined that all was over. I remained motionless, divided between the funereal awe which such a sight inspired, and the pious desire of raising the covering to kiss once more, before he should be enclosed in his coffin, the venerable forehead of my dear father. Fear, however, overcame every other feeling. An ice-like mortal and invincible terror drove me from the room. I flew down the staircase, I know not how, but I believe without touching a single step. I fled across the rooms and through the corridors, till the freshness of the air convinced me that I had left the castle. I fled, completely unconscious of whither my steps were leading me, until I remembered you had told me I should find you here. A secret instinct? Tell me what it was, for I cannot myself comprehend it, had led me in this direction. It appeared to me that I was pursued by shadows, horrid phantoms. At the corner of one of the avenues, I thought, had I then lost my senses? I thought I saw my mother dressed all in black and walking as noiseless as a spectre. Oh, then terror lent me wings. I at first fled without knowing whither. After this my strength failed me. And it was then you heard my cries. I dragged myself along a few more paces and fell motionless at this door. Had you not opened it, I should have expired upon the spot, for I was so much terrified that it appeared to me Then suddenly, pausing, Marguerite trembled and whispered to Paul, "Silence! Do you not hear?" "Yes," replied Paul instantly, extinguishing the lamp. "Yes, yes, footsteps. I hear them also." "Look, look!" cried Marguerite, concealing herself behind the curtains of the window and throwing them around Paul at the same moment. "Look, I was not mistaken. It was my mother." The door had been opened, and the Marchioness, pale as a spectre, entered the room slowly, closing the door after her and locked it. And then, without observing Paul and Marguerite, went into the second room where Achard was lying. She then walked up to his bed, as she had only a short time before to that of the Marquis, only that she was not now accompanied by a priest. "Who is there?" said Achard, drawing back one of the curtains of his bed. "It is I," replied the Marchioness, drawing back to the other curtain. "You, madam?" cried the old man with terror. "For what purpose have you come to the bedside of a dying man?" "I have come to make a proposal to you." "One that will lose his soul, is it not?" "To save it, on the contrary." "There is only one thing in this world, Achard, of which you stand in need," rejoined the Marchioness, bending down over the bed of the dying man, "and that is a priest. You refuse to allow the one who is attached to the castle to attend me." "In 5 minutes, if you wish it, he shall be here." "Let him be sent then," said the old man, "and believe me, there is not a moment to be lost. He must come quickly." "What can I do for you?" murmured the dying man, closing his eyes, that he might not see a woman whose looks chilled him. "You stand in need of a priest, that you may die in peace," said the Marchioness. "You know the gift I require in order to exist in tranquillity. You would close heaven to me by a perjury. I would open it to you by a pardon. That pardon I have already received. And from whom? From him, who perhaps had alone the right to grant it to me." "Has Morlaix then descended from heaven?" asked the Marchioness in a tone in which there was almost as much terror as irony. "No, madam," replied he. "But have you forgotten that he has left a son upon this earth?" "Then you have already seen him," exclaimed the Marchioness. "Yes," replied Achard. "And you have told him all?" "All." "And the papers which prove his birth?" asked the Marchioness with trembling anxiety. "The Marquis was not dead. The papers are still there." "Achard," cried the Marchioness, falling upon her knees by the bedside, "Achard, you would take pity on me." "You, on your knees before me, madam?" "Yes, old man," replied the Marchioness in a supplicating tone. "Yes, I am on my knees before you, and I beg, I implore you, for you hold in your hands the honour of one of the most ancient families in France. My past, my future life. These papers are my heart, my soul. They are more than this. They are my name, the name of my forefathers and of my children. And you well know all that I have suffered to preserve the name unsullied. Do you believe that I have not a heart as other women have, the feelings of a lover, of a wife, and of a mother? Well, I have overcome them all, one by one, and the struggle has been long. I am 20 years younger than you are, old man. I am still in the prime of life, and you are on the verge of the grave. Look then upon these hairs. They are even whiter than your own." "What says she?" whispered Marguerite, who had softly crept to the door and could see all that was passing in the inner room. "Gracious heaven!" "Listen, listen, dear child," said Paul. "It is the Lord who permits that all shall be thus revealed." "Yes, yes," murmured Achard, who was becoming weaker every moment. "Yes, you doubted the goodness of the Lord. You had forgotten that he had forgiven the adulterous woman. Yes, but when she met with Christ, men were about to cast stones at her. Men who for 20 generations have been accustomed to revere our name, to honour our family. Did they but learn that which, thank heaven, has heretofore been hidden from them, would hear it uttered with shame and with contempt. I have so much suffered that God will pardon me, but men are so implacable that they will not pardon. Moreover, I am alone exposed to their insults. On either side the cross I bear, have I not a child? And is not the other that we speak of the firstborn? In the eyes of the law, is he not the son of the Marquis d'Ore? Do you forget that he is the firstborn, the head of the family? Do you not know that in order to possess himself of the title, the estates and the fortune of the family of Ore, he has only to invoke the law? And then what would remain to Emmanuel? The cross of the Order of Malta, and to Marguerite, a convent. Oh, yes, yes, whispered Marguerite, and stretching out her arm towards the Marchioness. Yes, a convent, in which I would pray for you, my mother. Silence, silence, whispered Paul. Oh, you know him not, said Achard, whose voice was scarcely audible. No, but I know human nature, replied the Marchioness. He may recover a name, he, who has no name, a fortune, he, who has no fortune, and do you believe he would renounce that fortune and that name? Should you ask it of him, he would. And by what right should I demand it, said the Marchioness. By what right could I ask him to spare me, to spare Emmanuel, to spare Marguerite? He would say, I do not know you, madam. I have never seen you. You are my mother, and that is all I know. In his name, stammered Achard, whose tongue-death was beginning to be numb. In his name, madam, I engage, I swear. Oh, my God, my God. The Marchioness arose, observing attentively by the old man's features the approach of death. You engage, you swear, she said. Is he here to ratify this engagement? You engage, you swear, and on your word, you would that I should stake the years I have yet to live against the moments which yet remain between you and death. I have entreated, I have implored, and again I entreaty and implore you to give up these papers to me. Those papers now are his. I must have them, I repeat, I must have them, continued the Marchioness, gaining strength as the dying man became more. My God, have mercy upon me, murmured Achard. No one can now come, rejoined the Marchioness. You told me that you wore the key of that closet always about you. Would you wrest it from the hands of a dying man? No, replied the Marchioness. I will wait. Let me die in peace, exclaimed Achard, tearing the crucifix from the head of his bed, and raising it between himself and the Marchioness, he cried, Leave me, in the name of Jesus Christ. The Marchioness fell upon her knees, bowing her head to the ground. The old man for a moment remained in the same awful attitude. Then, by degrees, his strength forsook him, and he fell back on his bed, crossed his arms, and pressed the image of the Saviour to his breast. The Marchioness seized the lower part of two curtains, and without raising her head, she crossed them in such a manner as to conceal the last struggles of the dying man. Horror, horror, murmured Marguerite. Let us kneel and pray, said Paul. A moment of solemn and dreadful silence then ensued, which was only interrupted by the last gasps of the dying man. These gasps became fainter by degree and then ceased altogether. All was over. The old man was dead. The Marchioness slowly raised her head, listened with intent anxiety for some moments, and then, without opening the curtains, passed her hand between them, and after some effort, withdrew her hand again. She had obtained the key. She then silently arose, and with her face still turned towards the bed, walked to the closet. But at the moment she was about to unlock it, Paul, who was observing all her movements, rushed into the room and seized her by the arm, said, Give me that key, my mother, for the Marquis is dead, and those papers now belong to me. Justice of heaven, exclaimed the Marchioness, starting back with terror and falling into a chair. Justice of heaven, it is my son." "Merciful heaven," murmured Marguerite, throwing herself upon her knees in the outer room. "Merciful heaven, he is my brother." Paul opened the closet and took the casket which contained the papers. "Thou canst save me. Thou oughtst, thou must. I tell thee at his feet I'll fall a course ere mount his bridal bed. Go choose betwixt my rescue and my grave." Knowles, The Hunchback. Notwithstanding the dreadful nature of the events which had occurred during that fatal night, Paul had not forgotten the mortal defiance which had been exchanged between himself and Lector. As that young gentleman would probably not know where to find him, he thought it only decorous to save Lector the trouble of seeking for him. At about 7 in the morning, Lieutenant Walter presented himself at the castle, being charged on behalf of Paul to arrange the terms of the combat. He found Emmanuel in Lector's apartment. The latter, on perceiving the officer, withdrew and went down into the park that the two young men might more freely discuss the matter. Walter had received from his commander directions to accede to everything that might be proposed. The preliminary terms were, therefore, very speedily arranged, and it was agreed between them that the meeting should take place in the afternoon at 4 o'clock. The place of rendezvous, the seaside near the fisherman's hut, which was about halfway between Port Louis and Auray Castle. As to the weapons, they were to bring their pistols and their swords, and it would be decided on the spot which they were to use, it being clearly understood that Lector, having been the party insulted, should have the right to make his choice. As to the Marchioness, although in the first instance petrified by the unexpected appearance of Paul, she soon recovered all her natural firmness and drew her veil over her face. She withdrew from the chamber and walked across the outer room, which had remained in darkness. She did not, therefore, perceive Marguerite, who was kneeling in one corner of it, mute with astonishment and terror. She after that crossed the park, entered the castle, and repaired to the room in which the scene of the contract had taken place. There, by the dying light of the wax tapers, with both her elbows resting on the table, her head supported in her hands, her eyes riveted to the paper to which Lector had already affixed his name, and the Marquis had signed the half of his, she passed the remainder of the night reflecting upon a new determination. Thus she awaited the coming day without even thinking of taking the least repose, so powerful did her soul of adamant support the body in which it was enclosed. This resolution was to get Emmanuel and Marguerite away from the castle as speedily as possible, for it was from her children, most especially, that she desired to conceal that which was about to take place between Paul and herself. Marguerite, who had been thus mostly unexpectedly present at the deathbed of the Marquis and Achard, through which she had so providentially discovered her mother's secret, rushed into Paul's arms immediately after her mother departed from the cottage, exclaiming, "Oh, now you really are my brother." Her tears choked further utterance, and it was some minutes before Paul could tranquillize her agitated spirit, torn by so many and such conflicting emotions. Paul, then fearing that the Marchioness might inquire for her daughter on her arrival at the castle, urged Marguerite to hasten thither, and seeing that she was still trembling at the recollection of the many horrors she had witnessed, led her out of the castle, of which he locked the door and accompanied her to within a few paces of the castle. During this walk, Marguerite had in a certain degree recovered her composure. Paul stood gazing at her till he saw that she had safely entered the courtyard, and then returned to watch and pray beside the body of his father's faithful servant. At 7 o'clock, the Marchioness, hearing the noise occasioned by Lieutenant Walter's arrival at the castle, reached a bell which was standing on the table and rang it. A servant presented himself at the door in the grand livery he had worn the previous evening. It was easy to perceive that he also had not been in bed. "Inform Mademoiselle Diore that her mother is waiting for her in the drawing-room," said the Marchioness. The servant obeyed, and the Marchioness resumed gloomy and motionless her previous attitude. In a few minutes afterwards she heard a slight noise behind her, and turned round. It was Marguerite. The young girl, with more respect perhaps than she had ever before evinced, held out her hand towards her mother, that she might give her her hand to kiss. But the Marchioness remained motionless, as if she had not understood the intention of her daughter. Marguerite let fall her hand and silently awaited her mother's pleasure. She also wore the same dress as the night before. Sleep had hovered over the whole world, but had forgotten the inhabitants of Auray Castle. "Come nearer," said the Marchioness. Marguerite advanced one step. "Why is it that you are thus pale and trembling?" continued the Marchioness. "Madam," murmured Marguerite. "Speak," said the Marchioness. "The death of my father, so sudden, so unexpected," stammered Marguerite. "Indeed, I have suffered so much this night." "Yes, yes," rejoined the Marchioness in a hollow tone, but fixing on her daughter looks which were not altogether void of affection. "Yes, the young tree bends before the wind and is stripped of its leaves. The old oak alone withstands every tempest. I also have suffered, Marguerite, and suffered much. I have passed a dreadful night, and yet you see me calm and firm. God has endowed you with a soul, my mother, firm and austere, but you should not expect the same strength and firmness in the souls of others. You would destroy them." "And therefore is it," replied the Marchioness, letting her hand fall upon the table, "that all I ask of you is obedience. The Marquis is dead, Marguerite, and Emmanuel is now the head of the family. You must immediately set out to Benice with Emmanuel." "I?" exclaimed Marguerite. "I set out to Benice? And for what purpose?" "Because the chapel of the castle is too narrow to contain at the same moment the wedding party of the daughter and the funeral procession of the father." "My mother," replied Marguerite with an indescribable accent of anguish, "it would seem to me to be more pious to place a longer interval between two ceremonies of so opposite a nature." "True piety," rejoined the Marchioness, "should lead us to fulfil the last wishes of the dead. Cast your eyes upon this contract, and see the first letters of your father's name." "Oh, madam," cried Marguerite, "allow me to ask you whether my father, when he traced these letters, which death prevented him from finishing, was in possession of his faculties, and did he write them all of his own free will?" "Of that I am ignorant, mademoiselle," replied the Marchioness, with that imperative and icy tone which until this time had subjected all that approached her. "I am ignorant of that, but this I know, that the influence which made him thus act he fully understood, and I know also that parents, as long as they exist, should in the eyes of their children have the authority of God. Now, God has ordained me to effect things terrible in themselves, and I have obeyed. Do as I have done, mademoiselle, obey." "Madam," said Marguerite, who had remained standing, but who now seemed motionless, with somewhat of that determined tone which in her mother was so terrible, and in which she had inherited from her. "Madam, it is only 3 days ago that with tearful eyes I threw myself first at the feet of Emmanuel, then at the feet of the man who you would compel me to receive as my husband, and then at my father's. Neither of them would or could listen to me, for grasping ambition or reckless madness harden their hearts and drown my voice. At length I am now at your feet, my mother. You are the last person whom I can supplicate, but also you are best capable of understanding me. Listen then attentively to what I am about to say. Had I only to sacrifice my own happiness to your will, I would make that sacrifice. My love, I would sacrifice that also. But I must also sacrifice my son. You are a mother, and I also, madam. A mother? A mother? Cried the Marchioness. Yes, a mother, but by a dreadful fault. Be that as it may, madam, still I am a mother, and the feelings of a mother need not be sanctified in order to be holy. Well then, madam, tell me, for you should better comprehend these things than I. Tell me, if those who have given us birth have received from heavens a voice which speaks to our hearts, have not those to whom we have given birth a voice as powerful? And when these two voices are opposed to each other, to which ought we to obey? You will never hear the voice of your child, said the Marchioness. You will never see him again. I shall never again see my son, exclaimed Marguerite. And who, madam, can assert that positively? He will himself be ignorant as to whose son he is. And should he some day discover it, replied Marguerite, whose respect as a daughter was giving way before her mother's harshness, if he should then come to me and demand an account of his birth, and this may happen, madam, she took up the pen, and, with such an alternative awaiting me, tell me, ought I to sign this contract? Sign it, said the Marchioness. But, observed Marguerite, placing her trembling and convulsed fingers upon the contract, should my husband some day discover the existence of this child, should he demand an explanation from my lover of the wrong committed against his name and honour, if, in a desperate duel alone and without seconds, a duel in which it is agreed that one must fall, he should kill that lover, and then, tormented by his conscience, pursued by a voice from the tomb, my husband should at length become deprived of reason? Be silent, cried the Marchioness, her features quivering with terror, but still doubting whether it was chance or some unheard of discovery which dictated the words her daughter had employed. Be silent. You would have me then, continued Marguerite, who had now said too much to pause, you would have me, then, in order to preserve my name and that of my other children pure and unsullied, that I should immure myself with a man deprived of reason? You would have me banish from my sight and from his every living being, and that I should render my heart iron, that I may no longer feel, that my eyes should never shed a tear? You would have me then clothe myself in the mourning as a widow, before my husband's death? You would have my hair turn white 20 years before the accustomed time? Be silent, say not another word, cried the Marchioness, in a tone which proved that menaces were giving way to fear. Be silent. You would have me then, continued Marguerite, carried away by the bitterness of her grief. You would have me then in order that the dreadful secret might die with those who have the keeping of it, that I should banish from their deathbeds both priest and physician. You would, in fine, that I should wander from one deathbed to another, that I might close not the eyes but the mouths of the dying? Be silent, in the name of heaven, be silent, again cried the Marchioness, wringing her hands. Well then, continued Marguerite, tell me again, my mother, to sign this paper, and all this will happen, and the malediction of the Lord will be accomplished, and the faults of the fathers shall be visited upon the children, even to the 3rd and 4th generations. Ah, my God, exclaimed the Marchioness, bursting into tears. Am I not sufficiently humbled? Am I not sufficiently punished? Pardon, madam, cried Marguerite, recoiled to filial feelings by the first tears she had ever seen her mother shed. I implore you to forgive me. Yes, pardon. Ask for forgiveness, unnatural daughter, said the Marchioness, advancing towards Marguerite. You who have wrenched the scourge from the hands of eternal vengeance, and have yourself applied the lash even on your mother's forehead. Mercy, mercy, reiterated Marguerite. Pardon me, my mother. I knew not what I had said. You have deprived me of reason. I was mad." "Oh, my God," said the Marchioness, raising both her hands above her daughter's head. "Thou hast heard the words which have issued from my daughter's lips. It would be too much to hope that thy mercy will forget them, but at the moment thou shalt punish her. Remember that I have not cursed her." She then moved towards the door. Her daughter endeavoured to retain her, but the Marchioness turned towards her with an expression of countenance so fearful that without needing to lay a command upon her, Marguerite dropped the skirt of her mother's dress and remained with arms outstretched towards her, mute and palpitating, until the Marchioness had disappeared. And when she no longer saw her, she threw herself upon the ground with so piercing a shriek that it might have been deemed that the heart, which had so much suffered, had at length broken. Be angry as you will, it shall have scope. Cassius, you are yoked with a lamb that carries anger, as the flint bears fire, who, much enforced, shows a hasty spark, and straight is cold again. And from henceforth, when you are over earnest with your brother, he'll think your mother chides and leave you so. Shakespeare. Our readers will perhaps have been surprised that after the violent manner in which Paul had insulted Lecter the day before, a meeting had not been appointed for the following morning. But Lieutenant Walter, who had been commissioned to regulate the conditions of the duel, together with Count d'Ore, had received from his commander directions to make every concession saving on one point, and that was that Paul would not meet Lecter until the afternoon. The reason for this was that the young captain felt that until the time arrived when he should have wound up this strange drama, in which, having in the first instance mingled only as a stranger, he at last found himself in the position of the head of the family, his life belonged not to himself, and that he had not the right to risk it. Moreover, as we have seen, the delay he had fixed was not a long one, and Lecter, who was ignorant of the reason which could have induced his adversary to require it, had acceded to it without much difficulty. Paul had therefore determined not to lose a moment, and therefore, as soon as the hour arrived at which he could, with propriety, present himself to the Marchioness, he bent his steps towards the castle. The events of the previous evening, and of that day also, had occasioned so much confusion in the stately residence that he entered it without meeting a single servant to announce him. He nevertheless traversed the apartments, following the direction he had before twice taken, and on going into the drawing-room found Marguerite lying fainted on the floor. On seeing the contract lying on the table and his sister deprived of consciousness, Paul readily imagined that a dreadful scene must have taken place between the Marchioness and her daughter. He ran to Marguerite, raised her in his arms, and opened one of the windows to give her air. The state in which Marguerite then was proceeded more from a complete prostration of strength than an actual fainting fit, and therefore, as soon as she felt that assistance was being rendered her, and with a kindness which left no doubt as to the feelings of the person who had thus endeavoured to relieve her, she opened her eyes and recognized her brother, that living providence whom God has sent to sustain her every time she felt she was about to succumb. Marguerite related to Paul that her mother had endeavoured to compel her to sign the contract in order to get her to leave the castle with her brother, and that having been overcome by her grief and carried away by the dreadful situation in which she was placed, she had allowed her mother to perceive that she knew all. Paul comprehended at once the feelings which must have rent the heart of the Marchioness, who, after 20 years of silence, isolation and anguish, saw without being able to divine the manner in which it had been brought about, that in one moment her secret had been revealed to one of the two persons from whom she was most anxious to conceal. Therefore, compassionating the suffering of his mother, he resolved to terminate them as speedily as he could, by hastening on the interview he had come to seek, and which would at once enlighten her as to the intentions of that son, whose existence she was so unwilling to acknowledge. Marguerite, on her side, wished to obtain her mother's forgiveness. She therefore undertook to inform the Marchioness that the young captain waited her orders. Paul, therefore, remained alone, leaning against the high chimney-piece, above which was carved the escutcheon of his family, and began to lose himself in the thoughts which the succession and hurried events of the last few hours gave rise to, and which had rendered him the sovereign arbitrator of all that house. When one of the side doors suddenly opened, and Emmanuel appeared with a case of pistols in his hand. Paul turned his eyes towards them, and immediately perceiving the young man, bowed to him with that sweet and fraternal expression, which reflected in his features the serenity of his soul. Emmanuel, on the contrary, although he returned the salutation as politeness required, allowed those hostile feelings which the presence of the man whom he regarded as his personal and determined enemy had awakened to flush his features, and they instantly assumed a look of fierce defiance. "I was on the point of setting out to seek for you, sir," said Emmanuel, placing the pistols upon the table and remaining at some distance from Paul. "And that, however, without precisely knowing where to find you, for like the evil genie of our popular traditions, you appear to have the gift of being everywhere and nowhere. But a servant had informed me that he had seen you enter the castle, and I thank you for having saved me the trouble I was about to take, in thus anticipating my desire." "I am happy," replied Paul, "that my desire in this instance, although probably emanating from a totally different cause, has so harmoniously chimed in with yours. Well then, I am here. What do you ask of me?" "Cannot you divine even that, sir?" replied Emmanuel, with increasing agitation. "In that case, and you will allow me to express my astonishment that it should be so, you are but ill-informed as to the duties of a gentleman and an officer, and this is a fresh insult that you have put upon me." "Believe me, Emmanuel," rejoined Paul in a calm tone, "I yesterday called myself the Count, today I call myself Marquis d'Ore," said Emmanuel, interrupting with a gesture of haughtiness and contempt, "and I beg you, sir, that you do not forget it." An almost imperceptible smile passed over the lips of Paul. "I was saying then," continued Emmanuel, "that you but imperfectly comprehend the feelings of a gentleman. If you believe that I would permit another to take up, on my behalf, a quarrel which you came here to seek, yes, sir, for it is you who have thrown yourself across my path, and not I who have sought you." "His lordship, the Marquis d'Ore," said Paul, smiling, "forgets his visit on board the Indienne. A truce to your cavils, sir, and let us at once proceed to facts. Yesterday, I know not from what strange and inexplicable feeling, when I proposed to you that which I would not say to every gentleman, every officer, but simply any man of courage would instantly and without hesitation have acceded to. You refused, sir, and invading my provocation, you went, as it were, behind my back to seek an adversary, who, although not precisely a stranger to the quarrel, yet good taste, should have dictated that he ought not to have been drawn into it." "Believe me that in this, sir," replied Paul, with a calmness and the same candour of manner which had accompanied all he said, "I was compelled to yield to the exigency of the case, which did not leave me the choice of an adversary. You had proposed a duel, which I could not accept, you being my adversary, but which was perfectly indifferent to me with any other person. I am too much habituated to encounters of this description, and to encounters of a far more murderous and mortal nature, to consider an event of this kind but as one of the usual accidents of my adventurous life. You will, however, please to remember that it was not I who sought this duel. You yesterday proposed it to me, but as I could not, I again repeat it, appear as your antagonist, I selected Monsieur de Lector, as I would have done Monsieur de Nore or Monsieur la Jarry, because he happened to be there, within my reach, and because, if it were absolutely necessary that I should kill someone, I preferred killing an useless and insolent fop rather than a good and honest country gentleman, who would consider himself dishonoured, did but he dream that he had entered into a bargain of so vile and despicable a nature as to that which the Baron Elector has, in reality, proposed to you. "'Tis well, sir," said Emmanuel jeeringly. "Continue to constitute yourself as a redresser of wrongs, to dub yourself the knight-errant of oppressed princesses, and to yield yourself under the buckler of your mysterious replies. As long as this antiquated quixotism does not come in collision with my views, my interests, and my engagements, I will fully permit it to wander over the whole earth and ocean also, even from pole to pole, and I shall merely smile at it as it passes by me. But whenever this madness breaks out against me, as yours has done, sir, whenever in the intimate concerns of a family of which I am the head, I meet a stranger who orders as a master, where I alone have the right to raise my voice, I shall present myself before him, as I now do before you, should I have the happiness to meet him alone as I do you, and then feeling assured that no one else will come to interrupt us before I had obtained the necessary explanation, I would say to him, 'You have, if not insulted me, at all events wounded my feelings, sir, by coming to my house and injuring me in my interests and my family affections. It is then with me and not with another that you ought to fight, and you shall fight with me.' 'You are mistaken,' Emmanuel replied Paul. 'I will not fight at all events with you. The thing is impossible.' 'Oh, sir, the time of enigmas has gone by,' cried Emmanuel impatiently. 'We live in the midst of a world in which every moment we elbow a reality. Let us therefore leave the poetical and the mysterious to the authors of romance and tragedies. Your presence in this castle has been marked with circumstances too fatal to render it necessary to add that which is not to that which is. Lusignan returned, notwithstanding the order which condemned him to transportation. My sister, who, for the first time, has shown herself rebellious against the orders of her mother. My father, killed by your mere presence. These are the disasters by which you have been accompanied, which have heralded you from another hemisphere, and have formed your funereal escort. For all this, you have to account to me. Therefore, sir, speak. Sir, speak as a man should to a man, in the broad daylight, face to face, and not as a phantom, gliding in the darkness, which escapes under the cloud of night, letting fall some few solemn and poetic words, as if from the other world. Such things are well calculated to terrify nurses and children. Speak, sir, speak. Look at me. You will see that I am calm. If you have anything to reveal to me, I will listen to you.' 'The secret which you ask of me is not my own,' replied Paul, whose perfect calmness strongly contrasted with the feverish excitement of Emmanuel. 'Believe what I have said, and do not insist farther. Farewell.' After pronouncing these words, Paul moved towards the door. 'Oh,' cried Emmanuel, rushing between him and the door to prevent his passage. 'You shall not leave me thus, sir. I have you now. We are alone in this room, without fear of any interruption, into which it was not I that enticed you, but you have come here of your own free will. Therefore, hearken to that which I am about to say. The person you have insulted is myself. The person to whom you owe satisfaction is myself. The person with whom you have to fight is—' 'You are mad, sir,' tranquilly replied Paul. 'I have already told you it is impossible. Therefore allow me to withdraw.' 'Take care, sir,' cried Emmanuel, stretching out his hand to the box and taking out the pistols. 'Take care, sir. After having done everything in my power to compel you to act as a gentleman, I may treat you as a brigand. You are here in a house in which you are a total stranger. You have entered it, I know not how, nor for what purpose. If you have not come into it to despoil us of our golden jewels, you have entered it to steal the obedience of a daughter to her mother, and to cancel the sacred promise given by a friend to a friend. In one case or the other, you are a violator, whom I have met at the moment that his hands are about to seize a treasure. That treasure is honour, the most precious of all riches. Come, sir, believe me, you will do better to accept this weapon. Emmanuel endeavoured to thrust one of the pistols into Paul's hand and defend yourself. You may kill me, sir, replied Paul, again placing his elbow on the chimney-piece, as if he were continuing an ordinary conversation, although I do not believe that God would permit such great a crime. But you shall not force me to fight with you. I have before told you so, and I repeat it. Take the pistol, sir, cried Emmanuel. Take it, sir, I tell you. You believe that the threat I am making is but a vain menace. Undeceive yourself. For 3 days you have fatigued my patience. For 3 days have you filled my soul with gall and hatred. For 3 days have I familiarized my mind with the idea of ridding myself of you, whether it be by a duel or by murder. Do not imagine that the dread of punishment withholds my hand. This castle is isolated, mute, and deaf. The sea is there, and before you could even be laid in the tomb, I should be in England. Therefore, sir, for the last time I say to you, take this pistol and defend yourself. Paul, without uttering a word, gently put the pistol aside. Well then, cried Emmanuel, exasperated at the highest degree to the sang-froid of his adversary, as you will not defend yourself like a man, die like a dog. And so saying, he raised the muzzle of the pistol to the level of the captain's breast. At that moment a dreadful shriek was heard. It was Marguerite, who had returned from her mother, and who had, at a glance, comprehended all that had happened. She rushed upon Emmanuel, and at that moment he fired the pistol, but the direction of the ball had been changed by the young girl's striking of his arm. It passed 2 or 3 inches above Paul's head and shattered the glass above the chimney-piece. My brother, cried Marguerite, with one bound springing to where Paul stood and throwing her arms around him. My brother, are you not wounded? Your brother? Exclaimed Emmanuel, letting fall the pistol, which was still smoking. Your brother? Well, Emmanuel, said Paul, with the same calmness which he had evinced during the whole of this painful scene, do you now comprehend why it was I could not fight with you? At that moment the Marchioness appeared at the door, pale as a spectre, for she had heard the report of the pistol. Then looking around her with an expression of infinite terror, and seeing that no one was wounded, she silently raised her eyes to heaven, as if to ask if its anger was at length appeased. She remained thus for some time in an attitude of mental thanksgiving. When she again cast down her eyes, Emmanuel and Marguerite were on their knees before her, each holding one of her hands and covering it with tears and kisses. I thank you, my children, said the Marchioness, after a short silence. And now leave me with this young man. Marguerite and Emmanuel bowed with an expression of the most profound respect, and obeyed the command of their mother. O my mother, you do not know the heart that you have pierced. I, thy son, thine Arthur, I avenge, never on thee. Live happy, love my brother, forget that I was born. Here these proofs, these. Oh, see you where the words are blistered with my hot tears. I wept. It was for joy. I did not think of lands, of name, of birthright. I did but think these arms should clasp a mother. Buller, the sea captain. The Marchioness closed the door as soon as they had withdrawn, advancing into the middle of the room, and went without looking at Paul, and leaning upon the armchair in which the Marquis had the night before been seated to sign the contract. There she remained standing, with her eyes cast down upon the ground. Paul for a moment experienced the desire to throw himself upon his knees before her. But there was upon the features of the Marchioness such an expression of severity that he repressed the yearnings of his heart, and stood motionless awaiting her commands. After a few moments of ice-like silence, the Marchioness addressed him. "You desired to see me, sir, and I have come to know your will. You wished to speak to me. I am listening." These words were uttered without the Marchioness making the least movement. Her lips trembled, rather than opened. It seemed a marble statue that was speaking. "Yes, madam," replied Paul, in a tone of intense feeling. "Yes, yes, I desired to speak with you. It is long since that first desire was cherished in my heart, and it has never left me. Recollections of infancy preyed upon the minds of the grown man. I remembered a woman who would formerly glide to my cradle, and in my youthful dreams I thought her the guardian angel of my infancy. Since that time, still so fresh in my memory, although so distant, more than once, I believe, I had awakened with a start, imagining that I had felt upon my forehead the impression of a maternal kiss, and then seeing that there was no one near me, I would call that person, hoping she would perhaps return. It is now 20 years since first I thus had called, and this is the first time she has replied to me. Can it have been, as I have often fearfully imagined, that you would have trembled at again beholding me? Can it be true, as I at this moment fear, that you have naught to say to me?" "And had I feared your return," said the Marchioness in a hollow tone, "should I have been to blame? You appeared before me only yesterday, sir, and now the mystery which ought to have been concealed to all but God and myself is known to both my children. Is it my fault that God has been pleased to reveal the secret to them? Was it I that conducted Marguerite, despairing in her tears, to the bedside of her dying father, whose protection she had gone to ask, and whose confession she had compelled to hear? Was it I that led her to Achard? And was it not you, madam, that followed her thither? As to Emmanuel, the report you heard and that shattered glass attest that I would have preferred death rather than to have saved my life at the expense of your secret. No, no, believe me, madam, I am the instrument, and not the hand, the effect, and not the cause. No, madam, it is God who has brought about all this, that you might see at your feet, as you have just now seen them, your two children whom you have so long banished from your arms." "But there is a third," said the Marchioness, in a voice in which emotion began to evince itself, "and I know not what I have to expect from him." "Let me accomplish a last duty, madam, and that once fulfilled, he will on his knees await your orders." "And of what nature is this duty?" "It is to restore his brother to the rank to which he is entitled, his sister to that happiness with which she has lost, to his mother that tranquillity of mind which she has so long sought in vain." "And yet, thanks to you," replied the Marchioness, "Mr. de Maurepas refused Mr. de Lectoure the regiment he had solicited for my son." "Because," replied Paul, taking the commission from his pocket and laying it on the table, "because the king had already granted it to me for the brother of Marguerite." The Marchioness cast her eyes upon the commission and saw that it was made out in the name of Emmanuel Diore. "And yet you would give the hand of Marguerite to a man without name, without fortune, and what is more, to a man who is banished." "You are mistaken, madam. I would give Marguerite to the man she loves. I would give Marguerite not to the banished Lusignan, but to the Baron Anatole de Lusignan, His Majesty's government of the Isle of Guadeloupe. There is his commission also." The Marchioness looked at the parchment and saw that, in this instance, Paul had uttered but the truth. "Yes, I acknowledge it," she replied. "These will satisfy the ambition of Emmanuel and confer happiness on Marguerite. and at the same time secure your tranquillity, madam, for Emmanuel will join his regiment, and Marguerite will follow her husband. You will then remain here alone, as you have, alas, so frequently desired." The Marchioness sighed. "Is not this all you desire? Or have I deceived myself?" continued Paul. "But," said the Marchioness, "how can I recall the promise given to the Baron-Elector?" "The Marquis is dead, madam," replied Paul. "Is not the death of a husband and a father a sufficient cause for the adjournment of a marriage?" The Marchioness, without replying, seated herself in the armchair, took a pen and paper, wrote a few lines, folded the letter, and putting on the address the name of Baron-Elector, she rang the bell for a servant. After waiting a few moments, during which time both Paul and herself remained silent, a servant came into the room. "In 2 hours from this time you will deliver this to the Baron-Elector," said the Marchioness. The servant took the letter and withdrew. "And now," continued the Marchioness, looking at Paul, "now, sir, that you have done justice to the innocent, it remains to you to pardon the guilty. You have papers which prove your birth. You are the elder, at all events in the eyes of the law. The fortunes of Emmanuel and Marguerite are yours by right. What do you require in exchange for these papers?" Paul took them from his pocket, and showing them to the Marchioness, said, "Here are the documents. Look at them. They are the letters you wrote to my poor father. Look here, they are moistened by my tears, for I read them last night while watching over Achard's corpse." Then approaching the fireplace, he held them over the flaming wood, saying, "Permit me, even but once, to call you mother. Call me but once your son, and—" "Can it be possible?" exclaimed the Marchioness, rising. "You speak of name, of fortune," continued Paul, with an expression of profound melancholy. "What need have I of them? I have my own sword, gain a rank which few men of my age have ever attained. I have acquired a name which is pronounced with blessing by one nation, with terror by another. I could, did it so please me, amass a fortune worthy of being bequeathed to a king. What then are your name and your fortune and your rank to me? If you have nothing else to offer me, if you do not give me that which I have incessantly and in every position of my life most yearned for, that which I have not the power to create, which God had granted to me, but which misfortune wrested from me, that you alone can restore to me, a mother." "My son," exclaimed the Marchioness, overcome at last by his tears and supplicating accent, "my son, my son, my son." "Ah," exclaimed Paul, letting the papers fall into the flames which speedily consumed them. "Ah, that missed appellation has at length escaped your lips, that tender name so long desired and which I have so increasingly prayed to hear addressed to me. Merciful Heaven, I thank thee." The Marchioness had fallen back into her chair, and Paul had thrown himself upon his knees, his head leaning upon her bosom. At length the Marchioness gently raised him. "Look at me," she said. "For 20 years this is the first tear that has ever escaped my eyelids. Give me your hand." She placed it upon her heart. "For 20 years this is the first feeling of happiness with which my heart has palpitated. Come to my arms. For 20 years this is the first caress I have either given or received. These 20 years have doubtless been my expiation. Since God now pardons me, for he has restored to me the power of weeping, of feeling joy, and has permitted me to embrace my son. Thanks to God, and thanks to thee, my son." "My mother," cried Paul, "my beloved mother." "And I trembled at the thought of seeing you again. I trembled when I did see you. I know not, I could not have imagined that such feelings still existed in my heart. Oh, I bless thee, I bless thee." At that moment the tolling of the church bell was heard. The Marchioness shuddered. The funeral hour had arrived. The bodies of the noble Marquis d'Ore and that of the poor man Achard were about to be returned to the earth at the same moment. "This hour must be consecrated to prayer," said the Marchioness. "I must now leave you." "I must sail tomorrow, my mother," said Paul. "Shall I not once more see you?" "Oh, yes, yes," replied the Marchioness. "We must meet again." "Well then, my mother, this evening I shall be at the park gate. There is a spot which is sacred to me, and to which I must pay a last visit. I shall expect to meet you there. It is on that spot, my mother, that we should say farewell." "I will be there," said the Marchioness. "Here, my mother, here," said Paul. "Take these commissions, the one for Emmanuel and the other for the husband of Marguerite. Let the happiness of your children be conferred by yourself. Believe me, mother, you have bestowed more on me than I on you." The Marchioness retired to shut herself up in her oratory. Paul left the castle and proceeded towards the hut of the fisherman. "Hark, she has blessed her son. I bid ye witness, ye listening heavens, thou circumambient air, the ocean sighs it back, and with the murmur bustle the happy leaves. All nature breathes, aloud, aloft, to the great parent's ear, the blessing of the mother on her child." On approaching the fisherman's hut, the place appointed with Lector, Paul perceived Lusignan and Walter, who were waiting for him. Precisely at the hour agreed, Lector appeared on horseback. He had been obliged to find his way as best he could, for he had no guide, and his own servant was as much a stranger as himself to that part of the country. On seeing him at a distance, the young men came out of the hut. The Baron instantly put his horse into a gallop to hasten to them. When within a few paces of them, he alighted from his horse and threw the reins to his servant. "I trust you will pardon me, gentlemen," said he, "that I should have approached you thus alone, like a forsaken orphan, but the hour selected by that gentleman," he added, raising his hat to Paul, who returned the salutation, "was precisely the fixed upon for the funeral obsequies of the Marquis. I have therefore left Emmanuel to fulfil the duties of a son, and have come here without a second, trusting that I had to deal with an adversary generous enough to procure some friend of his own to aid me in this dilemma." "We are entirely at your service, Baron," replied Paul. "Here are two friends of mine. Select which you please, and he who shall be honoured by your choice will instantly become yours." "I have no preference, I swear to you," said Lector. "Please to designate which of these two gentlemen you may desire should render me this service." "Walter," said Paul, "be so good as to officiate as second to the Baron." The lieutenant assented. The two adversaries again bowed to each other. "And now, sir," continued Paul, "permit me, before our respective seconds, to address a few words to you, not of apology, but explanation." "At your own pleasure, sir," replied Lector. "When I uttered the words which have been the cause of your coming hither, the events which have since occurred at the castle were hidden in the womb of time, and these events might have entailed the misery of a whole family. You, sir, had on your side Madame d'Ore, Emmanuel, and the Marquis. Marguerite had but myself alone. Every chance was, therefore, in your favour. It was for this reason that I addressed myself directly to you, for had I fallen by your hand with circumstances which might for ever remain hidden to you, Marguerite could not have married you. If I had killed you, the case would have been still more simplified and required no commentary." "This exordium is really most logical, sir," replied the Baron, smiling, and tapping his boot with his riding whip. "Let us proceed, if you please, to the main body of the discourse." "Now," continued Paul, bowing in sign of acquiescence, "every circumstance has changed. The Marquis is dead. Emmanuel has received his commission. The Marchioness renounces your alliance, honourable as it may be, and Marguerite marries the Baron Anatole de Lusignan, who, for that reason, I did not name your second." "Aha!" exclaimed Lector. "Then this is the true meaning of the note which a servant delivered to me at the moment I was about to leave the castle. I had the simplicity to imagine that it was merely an adjournment. It appears that it was a dismissal in due form. 'Tis well, sir. And now to the peroration." "It will be as simple and frank as the explanation, sir. I did not know you. I had no desire to know you. Chance threw us in presence of each other and with opposing interests, hence our collision. Then, as I have before told you, mistrusting fate, I wished in some measure to make sure of a result. But now affairs have become so altered that either my death or yours would be totally useless, and would merely add bloodshed to the winding up of this drama. And tell me candidly, sir, do you think it would be worth while to risk our lives to so little purpose?" "I might, perhaps, agree with you in opinion, sir, had I not performed so long a journey," replied Lector. "Not having the honour to espouse Mademoiselle Marguerite Diore, I should desire at least to have the honour of crossing swords with you. It shall not be said that I have travelled all the way from Paris into Brittany for nothing. I am at your orders, sir," continued Lector, drawing his sword, and with it saluting his adversary. "At your good pleasure, sir," replied Paul, and replying to the salutation in the same manner. The two young men then advanced towards each other, their swords crossed, and at the third parry, Lector's sword was twisted from his hand and flew to a distance of 20 yards. "Before taking sword in hand," said Paul, "I had offered an explanation, and now, sir, I trust you will be pleased to accept my apology." "And this time I will accept it, sir," said Lector, in the same careless and easy manner as if nothing particular had occurred. "Pick up my sword, Dick." His servant ran to fetch it, handed it to his master, who very tranquilly put it into the scabbard. "Now," continued he, "if either of you gentlemen have any orders for Paris, I am about to return there and from this spot." "Tell the king, sir," replied Paul, bowing, and in his turn sheathing his sword, "that I feel happy that the sword he gave me to be employed against the English has remained unstained by the blood of one of my own countrymen." And then the two young men again bowed to each other. Lector remounted his horse, and at about 100 paces from the sea shore, got into the high road leading to Venise and galloped off, while his servant went to the castle to get his travelling carriage, with which Lector had ordered him to rejoin him speedily. "And now, Mr. Walter," said Paul, "you must send the longboat to the nearest creek to Auray Castle, and have everything in readiness to set sail tonight." The lieutenant immediately set out for Port Louis, and Paul and Lusignan returned to the fisherman's hut. During this time, Emmanuel and Marguerite had fulfilled the morning duty to which they had been summoned by the chapel bell. The body of the Marquis had been deposited in the emblazoned tomb of his ancestors, and Achards in the humble cemetery outside the chapel. And then the brother and sister repaired to their mother's apartment. The Marchioness delivered to Emmanuel the commission which he so anxiously coveted, and gave to Marguerite her unexpected consent to her marriage with Lusignan. She then handed to Marguerite the king's signed manual appointing Lusignan governor of Guadeloupe. And then, in order that the emotions which they experienced should not be renewed, and which were more poignant because they were concealed within their own breasts, for neither of them made any allusion to past events, the mother and the children embraced each other for the last time, each feeling the inane conviction that they should never meet again. The remainder of the day was occupied in necessary preparations for departure. Towards the evening, the Marchioness left the castle to meet Paul at the place which he had appointed. When passing through the courtyard, she perceived a carriage with horses already attached to it, standing on one side of it, and the young midshipman Arthur with 4 sailors on the other. Her heart was oppressed by the sight of this twofold preparation. She, however, passed on and went into the park without giving way to her emotions. So much had a long-continued restraint upon natural feelings given her the power of self-command. However, when she had reached a small clearing, from which she could see Achar's house, she paused, for her knees trembled beneath her, and she was obliged to lean for support against a tree, while she pressed her hand to her breast to restrain the violent beating of her heart. For there are souls which present danger, however imminent, cannot cause to quell, but which tremble at the remembrance of perils past. And the Marchioness recalled to mind the agonizing fear and emotions to which she had been for 20 years a prey, and during which time she had daily visited that house, now closer, never again to be opened. She, however, soon overcame this weakness and reached the park gate. There she again paused. Above all the trees rose the summit of a giant oak, whose wide-spreading branches could be discerned from many places in the park. Often had the eyes of the Marchioness remained riveted for hours upon its verdant dome, but never had she dared to seek repose beneath its shade. It was there, however, that she had promised to meet Paul, and there Paul was awaiting her. At length she made a last effort and entered the forest. From a distance she perceived a man kneeling upon the ground in the attitude of prayer. She slowly approached him, and kneeling down by his side, prayed also. When the prayer was concluded, they both rose, and without uttering a word, the Marchioness placed her arm around Paul's neck, and leaned her head upon his shoulder. After some moments' silence, they heard the noise of the wheels of a carriage at a distance. The Marchioness shuddered, and made a sign to Paul to listen. It was Emmanuel setting out to join his regiment. Shortly afterwards, Paul pointed in the direction opposite to that in which they had heard the noise, and showed the Marchioness a boat gliding rapidly and silently upon the surface of the ocean. It was Marguerite going on board the frigate. The Marchioness listened to the noise of the receding wheels as long as she could hear it, and followed with anxious eyes the movements of the boat as long as she could distinguish it. Then she turned toward Paul, and raising her eyes to heaven, for she felt that the moment was approaching when he, whom she was leaning upon, would in his turn leave her, she exclaimed, "May God bless, as I now bless, the duteous son who was the last to leave his mother." Saying these words, she threw her arms round his neck, pressed him convulsively to her heart, and kissed him. Then, gazing at him intensely, she seemed to be scanning every outline of his face, and then again rapturously embraced him. "Yes," she cried, "in every feature he is the living resemblance of my poor lost Morley." Then for some moments she seemed to be absorbed in thought. At last, after a seemingly violent struggle, she continued, "Paul, you have refused to accept any portion of that fortune to which you are legally entitled. Although you know the wealth of the Aure family is unbounded, and that the fortune which I inherit in my own right from the family of Sable is very large." Paul shook his head. "Well then, there is one thing that you must receive from your mother, as her parting gift. It is 20 years since I have dared look upon it, and yet I have clung to its possession. It is your father's portrait, presented to me when I was authorized to receive it, when, by the assent of both our families, he was to become my husband. Take it, my dear son, for although it tears my heart to part with it, yet I feel that I shall be more tranquil when it is in your possession. To no one else but yourself would I have given it. You will sometimes look upon it, and you will think of your mother, who must now remain for ever isolated from the world. But it is better that it should be so. Henceforth all my moments shall be spent in making my peace with heaven." While saying these words, she had drawn from her pocket a case which she put into Paul's hands, and which he had eagerly opened and gazed with intense interest at the features of his father. The miniature was richly set in diamonds of great value. Then, summoning all her fortitude, the Marchioness for the last time kissed her son, who was kneeling before her, and tearing herself from his arms, she returned alone to the castle. The next morning the inhabitants of Port Louis vainly sought the frigate that they had seen only the evening before, and which for 15 days had remained at anchor in the outer roads of Lorient. As on the former occasion, she had disappeared without their being able to comprehend the cause of her arrival, or the motive of her so sudden departure. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history. 5 years had elapsed since the occurrence of the events we have related. The independence of the United States has been recognized. New York, the last stronghold of the English, has been evacuated. The roar of cannon, which had resounded in the Indian seas as well as in the Gulf of Mexico, had ceased to the thunder. Washington, in the solemn meeting of Congress on the 28th of December 1783, had resigned his commission as General-in-Chief, and had retired to Mount Vernon, his parental estate, without any other recompense than that of being allowed to receive and send letters free of charge. And the tranquillity which America had begun to enjoy had extended to the French colonies in the West Indies, for the mother country, having espoused the American cause, they had been several times exposed to the hostile attempts of Great Britain. Among these islands, Guadeloupe had been more particularly threatened in consequence of its military and commercial importance, but thanks to the vigilance of its new governor, the attempts of the enemy to land there had always failed, and France had not to mourn over any serious discomfiture in this important position, so that at the end of the commencement of the year 1784, the island, without being altogether denuded of warlike appearance, which was maintained in it more from custom than from necessity, the inhabitants generally had applied themselves anew to the cultivation of the numerous products which formed its riches. If our readers will be pleased by a last effect of their complaisance, to accompany us to the other side of the Atlantic and land with us at the port of Bassit, we will conduct them amidst fountains which jet on every side, through the street which leads to the promenade called Champ d'Abord. Then, after having availed ourselves of the cool shade of the tamarind trees planted on each side of it, till we have proceeded about 2/3 of its length, we will turn upon the left up a small beaten road which conducts to the gate of a garden, the upper part of which commands a view of the whole town. When we have arrived there, we will allow them for a few moments to inhale the evening breeze, so refreshingly sweet after the midday heat of the month of May, and they can cast a glance with us over the luxuriant vegetation of the tropics. With our backs turned to the woody and volcanic mountains which divide the western part of the island, and amid which arise, crowned with their plumes of smoke and sparks, the 2 calcined pinnacles of the Sulphur Mountain, we have at our feet, sheltered by the hills, which have been named Bellevue, Mont Desire, Beau-Soleil, Espérance, and St. Charles, the city gracefully descending towards the sea, the waves of which, sparkling with the last rays of the setting sun, laves its white walls, the horizon formed by the ocean lying like a vast and limpid mirror, and to the right and to the left the most beautiful and richest plantation on the island, large square fields of coffee trees, transplanted originally from Arabia, with their knotty and flexible branches, covered with dark green glossy leaves of an oblong and pointed form, and bearing clusters of flowers as white as snow. Long rows of cotton plants, covering with a rich carpet of verdure the dry and stony soil on which they thrive best, and among which we see, like so many colonial ants, negroes occupied in reducing to 2 or 3 the 1,000 shoots which sprout out from every stalk. And then again, but in more level and well-sheltered spots, in which the soil is richer and more argillaceous, we see plantations of cocoa trees, first introduced into the West Indies by the Jew Benjamin da Costa, with their lofty trunks and porous branches, covered with fawn-coloured bark, from which large oblong leaves are pending, among which we see fresh shoots of a soft rose colour, which contrasts strongly with the long curved and yellow fruit which bends the branches with its weight. And further off, whole fields of the plant discovered at tobacco, first brought to France by the ambassador of Francis II, who presented it to Catherine de Medici, from which circumstance it devised its name of herb à la reine. This did not, however, prevent it from being, like every popular thing in the first instance, excommunicated and proscribed in Europe and Asia by the 2 powers who then divided the world. Proscribed by the Grand Duke of Muscovy, Michael Fedorich, by the Turkish Sultan Amurath IV, by the Emperor of Persia, and excommunicated by Pope Urban VIII. Here and there we see springing up to the height of 40 or 50 feet above all the shrubs and plants by which it is surrounded, the banana tree of paradise, of which, according to tradition, the oval leaves 7 or 8 feet in length serve to form the first garment of the first created woman. And finally, elevated above all the rest, and standing forth preeminent, whether hacked by the azure of the heavens, or by the dark green tree, the coconut and palm tree, those 2 giants of the western archipelago, graceful and prodigal, as is everything that is powerful. Figure to yourselves, then, these beautiful hills, intercepted by 70 rivers, eased in beds 90 feet in depth, these mountains illuminated during the day by a tropical sun, at night by the volcano of the Sulphur Mountain, that vegetation which never is arrested, the new leaves of which succumb the leaves which fall, this soil so salubrious and air so pure, that, notwithstanding the insensate experiments that man, the real enemy of himself, has made by transporting serpents from Martinique and St. Lucie, it was found that they could neither live nor reproduce there. And then judge, after the suffering they had endured in Europe, of the happiness which Anatole de Lusignan and Marguerite Diore must have enjoyed there. Queen's grass, to a life agitated by the passions, to that struggle of natural rights against legal power, to that succession of scenes in which all earthly pains from childbirth even to death had played their part, has succeeded a life of pure delights, each day of which had passed on calmly and tranquilly. The only clouds that darkened it arose from the vague uneasiness of distant friends, which, as if borne upon the air, and which contracted the heart like a painful presentiment. However, from time to time, whether by newspaper or by vessels touching at the island, Anatole and Marguerite had obtained some intelligence of the general being who had so powerfully served them as a protector. They had heard of his victories, that after he had left them, he had been appointed to the command of a small squadron and had destroyed the English establishments on the coast of Acadia, which had gained for him the title of Commodore. That in an engagement with the Serapis and the Countess of Scarborough, after a battle yard-arm to yard-arm which lasted 4 hours, he had obliged the 2 frigates to strike to him, and that finally, as a reward for the services he had rendered to the cause of American independence, he had received the public thanks of Congress, who had voted him a gold medal and had selected him to command the frigate America, to which that name had been given as being the finest in the service, and the command of which had been conferred on him as the bravest of its officers. But this splendid ship had been presented by Congress to the King of France to replace the Magnifique, which had been lost at Boston. Paul Jones, after conducting this frigate to Havre, had joined the fleet of the Count de Vaudreuil, who had projected an attack upon Jamaica. This last intelligence had overjoyed the hearts of Lusignan and Marguerite, for this enterprise would bring Paul into their latitude, and they hoped at last they should soon see their brother and their friend. But peace, as we have before said, had intervened, and from that time they had heard no more of the adventurous seaman. In the evening of the day on which we have transported our readers from the wild shores of Brittany to the fertile coast of Guadeloupe, the young family were assembled in the very garden which we have entered, and which commands a view of the immense panorama we have described, the foreground of which is formed by the city, at its feet the ocean studded with islands in the distance. Marguerite had promptly habituated herself to the soft listlessness of Creole life, and her mind now tranquil and full of happiness, she gave herself up to the dolce far niente, which renders the sensual existence of the colonies a half-sleep, the incidents of which appear as dreams. She was lying with her daughter in a Peruvian hammock, netted with the silken fibres of the allure, and ornamented with the most brilliant coloured plumes of the rarest tropical birds. Her son was swinging her with a soft and regular motion, and Lusignan was holding one of her hands between both his. She was still pale, but delicate and graceful as a wild lily. Her looks were vacantly wandering over the immense extent of the ocean lying before her, and she felt her soul and senses enraptured by all the bliss which heaven could promise, and all the enjoyments which this earth can offer. At that moment, and as if everything concurred to complete the magic spectacle which every evening she came there to contemplate, and which every succeeding evening she found still more marvellously beautiful, there suddenly appeared, doubling the Cape Troyes pointers, and looking like an ocean king, a large vessel gliding along the surface of the sea without more apparent effort than a swan playing upon the tranquil bosom of a lake. Marguerite was the first to perceive it, and without speaking, for every action is a fatigue under this burning clime, she made a sign with her head to Lusignan, who directed his looks to the spot that she had indicated, and then, like her, silently followed with his eyes the rapid and graceful movements of the vessel. By degrees, as she approached, and as the elegant and delicate proportions of her masts amid the mast of sails which they sustained could be discerned, which in the first instant has seemed a cloud floating upon the horizon, they began to discover in one corner of her flag the stars of America, equal in number to the states they represent. One same idea shot instantly through their minds, and they exchanged a glance radiant with hope that they were perhaps about to receive some news of Paul. Lusignan immediately ordered a negro to bring a telescope, but before he had returned, a hope still more delightful pervaded both their hearts. It appeared to Lusignan and Marguerite that they recognized an old friend in the frigate that was approaching. To persons, however, unaccustomed, it is so difficult to distinguish at a great distance signs which speak at once to the eye of an experienced seaman, that they did not yet dare to have faith in this hope, and which indeed was more an instinctive presentiment than positive reality. At last the negro brought the so much longed-for telescope. Lusignan uttered a cry of joy, and then handed it to Marguerite. He had recognized the sculpture of Guillaume Costo upon the prow of the vessel. It was really the Indienne, which was advancing towards Basseterre. Lusignan raised Marguerite from the hammock and placed her on her feet. For their first impulse was to hasten to the harbour, but then they reflected that Paul had left the Indiana nearly 5 years ago, at the time that his promotion entitled him to be the commander of a large vessel, and that she might now be under the orders of another captain. And they paused with palpitating hearts and trembling limbs. During this time their son Hector had taken up the telescope and placed it to his eye, looking through it, and saw after exclaimed, "Father, see there! Upon the deck stands an officer, dressed in a black coat embroidered with gold, just like the one in the picture of my dear friend Paul." Lusignan hastily snatched the glass from his son's hands, looked through it for a few moments, then again passed it to Marguerite, who, after directing it towards the vessel, let it fall. And then they threw themselves into each other's arms. They had recognized their friend, who, as he was about to visit them, had put on the dress, which we have before said he had generally worn. At this instant the frigate passed the fort, which it saluted with 3 guns, and the fort returned the salute with an equal number. From the moment that Lusignan and Marguerite had acquired the certitude that their friend and brother was actually on board the Indienne, they had hastened down the mountain, followed by young Hector, towards the port, leaving their little Blanche in the hammock. The captain had also recognized them, so that at the moment they left the garden he had ordered a boat to be lowered. And thanks to the united strength of 10 vigorous oarsmen, he had rapidly glided over the distance between the anchorage ground and the port, and had sprung upon the jetty at the instant that his friends arrived there. Such sensations as then filled their breasts cannot be expressed in words. Tears are their only interpreter, and thus their joy more closely resembled grief, for they all wept, even to the child, who wept because he saw them weep. After giving some orders relating to the vessel, the young Commodore, with his delighted friends, slowly ascended the hill down which they had rushed so rapidly to meet him. Paul told them that the expedition of Admiral Verdrel having failed, he had returned to Philadelphia, and peace having been signed, as we before mentioned, with England, the Congress, as a token of gratitude, had presented him with the first ship he had commanded as captain. Upon hearing this, Lusignan and Marguerite experienced the most lively joy, for they hoped that their brother had come with the intention of taking up his abode with them. But the character of the young seaman was too adventurous, and stood too much in need of excitement to sink quietly down into the monotonous and unvaried dullness of a life on shore. He informed his friends that he had but 8 days to remain with them, after which he should seek in another quarter of the globe to follow the profession he had adopted. These 8 days passed by as rapidly as a dream, and notwithstanding the reiterated entreaties of both Lusignan and Marguerite, Paul would not consent to delay his departure even for 24 hours. He was still the same ardent, determined being, considering the execution of a resolution he had once formed as a positive duty, and more austere with regard to himself than towards others. The hour of separation had arrived. Marguerite and Lusignan wished to accompany the young Commodore on board his ship, but Paul wished not to prolong the grief of this leave-taking. When they reached the jetty, he embraced them for the last time, then jumped into his boat, which was rowed away as swiftly as an arrow. Marguerite and Lusignan followed him with their eyes until his boat had disappeared on the leeward side of the frigate, and they sorrowfully reascended the hill to watch the ship's departure from the same terrace from which they had before discerned his arrival. At the moment they reached it, they observed the activity and bustle on board the frigate which always preceded the departure of a vessel. The sailors had surrounded the capstan and were employed in getting up the anchor. and thanks to the pureness of the atmosphere, the sonorous and lively cries of the seamen reached the ears of Lusignan and Marguerite. The anchor was soon apeak, and they saw it rising slowly under the ship's bows. Then the sails dropped successively from the yards, from the royals to the courses, and the ship, seemingly endowed with the instinctive and animated feeling, gracefully turned a prow towards the harbour's mouth, and beginning to move, cut through the waves with an easy motion, as if merely gliding upon the sea. Then, as if the frigate might be abandoned to her own will, they saw the young Commodore spring upon the stern rails, and devote all his attentions to the land he was thus leaving. Lusignan took out his handkerchief and made a signal, to which Paul replied. And then, when they could no longer perceive each other with the naked eye, they had recourse to their telescopes, and thanks to this ingenious invention, they retarded the separation for another hour. They all felt a presentiment that this separation would be eternal. The vessel gradually diminished upon the horizon, and darkness was about to cover the heavens, when Lusignan ordered a quantity of wood to be brought upon the terrace, to form a beacon fire, which was instantly ignited in order that Paul, whose vessel was nearly enshrouded in the darkness, might continue to fix his eyes upon that spot until he had doubled Cape Troy's pointers. Lusignan and Marguerite had for an hour lost sight of the ship, while Paul, thanks to their large brilliant fire, might still perceive them when a bright flame like a flash of lightning appeared on the horizon. And in a few seconds the report of a gun similar to the prolonged sound of distant thunder reached their ears, and all again was silent. Lusignan and Marguerite had received Paul's last farewell. And now, although the domestic drama, which we had undertook to relate, has in fact terminated here, some of our readers may perhaps have felt sufficient interest in the young adventurer of whom we have made the hero of this story, to follow him in the second part of his career. To these, then, after thanking them for the kind attention that they have been pleased to grant to us, we are about to recount truly and plainly facts which a most minute research has enabled us to lay before them. At the period we have reached, that is to say in the month of May 1784, the whole of Europe had fallen into that state of torpor which unthinking men imagined to be tranquillity, but which minds more profound regarded as the dull and momentary calm that preceded the tempest. America, by obtaining her independence, had prepared France for her revolution. Kings and people, mistrusted of each other, were upon their guard. Peter III, who had become odious to the Russians in consequence of his ignoble character, the narrowness of his political views, and above all, for his excessive leaning towards Prussian manners and Prussian disciplines, had been disposed without opposition and strangled without a struggle. Catherine had thus found herself, at the age of 32, mistress of an empire which extended over 1/7 of the globe. Her first care was to compel the neighbouring powers to accept her as a mediatrix in their quarrel, and thus become dependent upon her. Thus had she obliged the people of Courtland to drive from them their new Duke, Charles of Saxony, and to recall Byron. She had sent her ambassadors and her armies to Warsaw, there to have crowned by the name of Stanislaus Augustus her former lover, Poniatowski. She had formed an alliance with England. She had associated to her policy the courts of Vienna and Berlin, and notwithstanding all these great projects of foreign policy, she had not neglected the internal government of her own country, and in the interval of her amours, so fickle and so various, she still found time to reward industry, to encourage agriculture, to reform the laws, to raise an army to send Pallas into provinces the productions of which were still then unknown, Plumega into the northern archipelago, and Bellings into the Indian Ocean, in fine jealous of the literary reputation of her brother the King of Prussia. She wrote with the same hand that had ordered the erection of a new city, signed the order for the execution of young Ivan, and the dismemberment of Poland. The refutation of the journey into Siberia by the Abbé Chap, a romance of the Tsarevich Klaus, several plays, among which was a translation into French of Oleg, a drama written by the Russian poet Dushauin, so that Voltaire proclaimed her the Semiramis of the North, and the King of Prussia, in his letters, classed her between Solon and Lycurgus. The effect produced amidst this voluptuous and chivalric court by the arrival of such a man as our adventurous seaman can readily be imagined. The reputation for courage, which had rendered him the terror of enemies of France and America, had preceded him to the court of Russia, and in exchange for his frigate, which he presented to Catherine, he received the rank of rear admiral. Then the flag of Russia, after having navigated round one half of the old world, appeared in the Grecian seas and beneath the ruins of Lacedaemon and the Parthenon. He who had assisted in establishing the independence of America dreamt of the re-establishment of the republics of Sparta and of Athens. The old Ottoman Empire was shaken to its foundations. The defeated Turks signed a treaty of peace at Kenaji. Catherine retained Azov, Taganrog, and Kenbur and Kenburn, compelling the Turks to grant her the free navigation of the Black Sea and the independence of the Crimea. She then desired to visit her new possessions. Paul, recalled to St. Petersburg, accompanied her on this journey, and the route of which had been drawn up by Potemkin. During the whole of this, all the attributes of triumph were offered to the conquering empress and her suite. Bonfires were lighted all along the road, cities were illuminated with the most fairy-like brilliancy, magnificent places erected, as if by magic, for one day amid desert countries and which the next morning disappeared, villages, rising as if beneath the wand of an enchanter, in solitude in which 8 days before the Tartars fed their flocks, towns appearing on the horizon of which there existed but the exterior walls in every direction, homage and songs of welcome, and dances of the people during the day. A numerous population crowded the road, and at night, while the Empress was sleeping, they would run to station themselves in the way she was to proceed on waking the following morning. A king and emperor rode by her side, calling themselves not her brothers, not her equals, but her courtiers. Finally, a triumphal arch was erected at the last stop she was to make on our journey southwards, bearing the inscription, "This is the road to Byzantium," which, if it did not reveal the ambition of Catherine, demonstrated at least the policy of Potemkin. Then Russia became strengthened in her tyranny as America had in her independence. Catherine offered to her admiral places which would have more than satisfied the rapacity of a courtier, honours which would have overwhelmed the ambitious, estates which would have consoled the deposed king of the loss of his dominions. But it was the deck of his ship, it was the sea with its combats and its tempests, it was the boundless immensity of the ocean for which yearned the heart of our adventurer and the poetic seaman. He therefore left the brilliant court of Catherine, as he had left the austere Congress of America, and returned to France to seek that which he could not find elsewhere, that is to say, a life of excitement, enemies to combat, a people to defend. Paul arrived in Paris in the midst of our European wars and civil struggles, while with one hand we were seizing a foreign enemy by the throat, with the other we were tearing our own entrails. That king, whom he had seen 10 years before, beloved, honoured, powerful, was then a captive, despised and strengthless. All that had been exalted was abased, and great names fell as did high-born heads. It was the reign of equality, and the guillotine was the levelling instrument. Paul inquired after Emmanuel, and was told that he was proscribed. He asked what had become of his mother, and was informed that she was dead. Then he felt an irresistible longing to revisit once again, before he himself might die, the spot on which 12 years before he had experienced emotions at once so sweet and terrible. He set out for Brittany, left his carriage at Venez, and mounted on horseback, as he had done on the first day he had seen Marguerite. But he was no longer the young and enthusiastic seaman, whose desires and hopes had no horizon. He was a man bereft of all those brilliant illusions, for he had tasted of all, whether sweet or bitter, had learnt to appreciate all, both men and things, had known all, glory and oblivion. Therefore did he not come to search a family, but to visit tombs. When he came within sight of the castle, he turned his eyes towards Achard's house, and not being able to discover it, he thought he would go into the forest. But the forest seemed to have vanished as by enchantment. It had been sold as national property to 25 or 30 farmers of the neighbourhood, who had cleared off the timber and transformed it into a large plain. The gigantic oak had disappeared, and the plough had passed over the unknown grave of the Count de Morlaix, and the eyes of his son even could no longer recognize the spot. Then he returned through the park towards the castle, now becoming even more gloomy and desolate than when he had last seen it. In it he found only an old man, a living ruin amidst these ruins of the past. It was at first intended to have pulled down the mansion, but the reputation for holiness which the Marchioness had left behind her was regarded with such religious veneration throughout the country that the old walls, which for 4 centuries had been the abode of her ancestors, remained undesecrated. Paul went through the apartments which for 3 years had remained closed, and which were now open to him. He walked through the portrait gallery. It was in the same state as he had formerly seen it. No pious hand had added to the portrait either of the Marquis or the Marchioness. He went into the study in which he had been concealed, found a book lying in it which had been opened and placed upon the very spot in which he had found it, and read the same passages which he had read so many years before. He then pushed open the door which communicated with the contract, where had passed the chief scenes of that drama in which he was the principal actor. The table was still in the same place, and the Venetian looking-glass over the chimney-piece was there, shattered as it had been by the ball of Emmanuel's pistol. Paul advanced to the fireplace, and placed his elbow on the marble mantelpiece, questioned the servant as to the last years of the Marchioness. The account he received showed that she had remained austere and melancholy as was her wont. Remaining secluded and alone in the castle, her hours were uniformly spent in 3 different places: her oratory, the vault in which the body of her husband had been buried, and the spot sheltered by the oak tree, at the foot of which her lover had been interred. For 8 years after the evening which Paul had taken leave of her, she had been seen to wander amid the old corridors of the castle and in the gloomy avenues of the park, slow and pale as a spectre. Then a disease of the heart, engendered by the agony she had suffered, declared itself, and she daily became weaker. At length, one evening, when her failing strength no longer permitted her to walk, she had ordered the servants to carry her to the foot of the oak tree, her favourite walk, that she might once more see, she said, the sun setting in the ocean. When they had reached the spot, she desired the servants to withdraw, and to come back for her in half an hour. On the return, they found her lying fainted on the ground. They immediately bore her to the castle, but having recovered her senses on the way, she ordered them, instead of conducting her to her own room, which they usually did, to take her down to the family vault. There she had still strength enough to kneel upon the tomb of her husband, and made a sign that she desired to be left alone. However imprudent their doing so might be, the servant's elbow on the marble withdrew, for she had accustomed them to obey her in everything at the first intimation of her will. They, however, remained at a short distance concealed behind the corner of a tomb, that they might be ready to render her assistance should it be necessary. In a few moments they saw her fall down upon the stone on which she had been praying. They rushed forward, imagining that she had again fainted, but she was dead. Paul requested the old servant to conduct him into the vault, and slowly entered it with uncovered head, and when he had reached the stone which covered the grave of his mother, he knelt down and prayed. On the monumental stone were inscribed the following words, and which may still be seen in one of the chapels of the church in the small town of Ore, to which it has since been removed. The inscription had been written by the Marchioness herself, and she had desired that it should be placed upon her tomb. Here lies the very noble and very puissant Lady Marguerite, Blanche de Sable, Marchioness of Ore, born the 2nd of August, 1729, died the 3rd of September, 1788. Pray for her and for her children. Paul raised his eyes to heaven with an expression of infinite gratitude. His mother, who during her life had for so long a time forgotten him, had remembered him in her funeral inscription. 6 months after this visit, the National Convention decreed in a solemn sitting that they would attend in a body the funeral processions of Paul Jones, formerly a Commodore of the American Navy, and whose burial was to take place in the cemetery of Père Lachaise. They had come to this decision, said the decree, in order to concentrate the establishment of religious freedom throughout France.